Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Indra in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 1, Anatomy of a Disaster. The Hokage's room was eerily silent. Two men flanked the fire shadow, and his face was hidden under the heavy hat. The Jinchuriki stood facing him, the length of the room seeming impossibly long. His eyes were crimson, as they were most of the time, now. His face was blank, even though many contradictory emotions meant his stomach felt as if it were on fire. The beast inside of him was laughing. He'd have to do something about that, too. Later. The Hokage stared at him. "You've heard the news, I presume?" he simply asked. "Why? Why did you do it?" The two of them had been friends, once. And his students, too. The younger man nodded, not letting anything show. "Then, you know what must be done." He did. For the murder of Heitake Kakashi, as well as the theft of his Sharingan, Uzumaki Naruto, now an S-rank missing nin, must die. Will you do the job? Uchiha Sasuke nodded. On October 10, hours after the Nine Tails attacked, the citizens of Konoha mourned their fallen leader. Days later, when the news reached the other hidden villages and the initial wave of skepticism faded away, there were just as many more, maybe people celebrating, particularly in IWA. Young, bright and charismatic, he was as feared by his foes as he was loved by his friends. The fact that he was cut in his prime, well before reaching his full potential, was bad enough. But the announcement Sarutobi Hiruzen made the day after revealed a real tragedy. The fourth's pregnant wife, Kushina of the now gone Uzumaki clan, had died during the attack, along with their child, Naruto. And if their late Hokage managed to take the Nine Tails with him in death, the way he had managed to do it would remain a secret. With their leader gone, and many of their best ninja dead, there were many who expected Sarutobi to step up and take the hat once more. Though it pained him to do so, he didn't, opting to take care of his injured wife, Biwako instead. He appointed someone else, a third war hero, and stepped off. Somehow, everything changed. Chapter 2, Sarutobi Naruto. 20 children were born the night the Nine Tails attacked. Several of them were premature, their delivery hastened by the stress brought on by the event. Of course, this meant many of them lost a parent that night, sometimes both. Some to the devastation the Nine Tails caused in its wake, some to childbirth. Orphans were not a new concept to a ninja village by any stretch, but this new influx so soon after the end of the latest war pushed Konoha's support system to its limit. Faced with a difficult decision, the third chose what he felt was the best one, for both the fourth's son, and the village. The Nine Tails was gone in a blink, just as he had appeared. He found Biwako in the cave Kushina was supposed to give birth in, still alive, but the sole survivor of the attack. In between pained breaths, she recounted the events of that night, of a masked man with a single Sharingan. Despite his worry for his wife, he left his umbu with her, assured she would pull through, and rushed to join the fourth, hoping he could help. He, and he alone, came to the place where Minato and his wife had died. The Nine Tails was nowhere to be seen, and both Minato and Kushina's bodies were still warm. He pushed past his grief at the death of two people he had loved, and found a wailing newborn tucked between them. The seal on his belly told him the whole story of what had happened. And he knew that with a man after the Nine Tails, likely still alive, and several rival nations who would see this child dead before his first birthday, something drastic needed to be done. Even then, he hesitated. "Minato, Kushina, please forgive me." It would be one of his last acts as Hokage. The professor weaved through the 21 hand signs the technique required. He then cut his palm open and used the blood as the catalyst for his jutsu. He drew the seal on the child's young Naruto, he knew for it, hesitated again, and activated it. Naruto's hair darkened from bright blonde to mousy brown, his whisker marks disappeared, and Sarutobi knew his eyes had turned to dark brown as well. Like most Sarutobi. He wrote a short word to his umbu, who would no doubt follow him here, about pursuing the attacker, hid Naruto in a bundle of cloth, and hurried towards the Sarutobi compound under the cover of a camouflage technique. He would need to hide the Nine Tails' presence deeper in the next few days, and make sure to cover his tracks as well. Biwako was the only witness, and she would understand the need to keep some of the events that transpired that night a secret. The story would go like this. When the morning came, Namikaze Naruto would be another tragic victim, dying as a hostage to the outsider with the Sharingan who summoned the Nine Tails to the village. To become the unnamed, orphan son of Sarutobi Ren, disgraced Chunin who had survived the Third War only to find death in a bar fight, and a prostitute who died in the attack was the son of the fourth deserved, Hiruzen felt. But it was the only way that would allow him to survive and grow strong, hidden away where no one would bother to look. When the morning came, Sarutobi Naruto, named in honor of the fourth's dead son, would be yet another orphan in a ninja village. When Sarutobi Hiruzen called in an emergency meeting right after the fourth died, no one batted an eye. The assembled clan heads found Biwako telling them about Kushina's status as a container an open secret, at this point in her and Minato's plan to deliver the baby in a secluded location. She told them of the masked man with a Sharingan as well. Danzo looked both vindicated and furious at the same time, and Uchiha Fugaku seemed to become even more tense than he already was. I am certain of one thing, she said before either could speak. The intruder is not anybody from the village. Nor is it anybody whose chakra I ever felt before. She knew that this foul chakra, fire mixed with something that reminds her of the forest, with a tainted feeling thrown in the mix, is not something she would ever forget. What makes you so sure? Tsum, the new head for the Inyazuka clan since Itsuru died in the attack, just hours before, asked. I am a censor. Her tone left no room for discussion. Besides, there is something more. This man identified himself as Uchiha Madara. There was silence in the room. Then all hell broke loose. Is this a joke? Danzo asked flatly to Hiruzen, after he announced his choice of a successor. I assure you, I am entirely serious. The third replied, just as blunt. A man, likely from the Uchiha clan, claims to be Madara, long since dead, releases the Nine Tails from its prison and kills both Namikaze and Arjun Churiki. Danzo, who usually prided himself on his control, was fuming. He marked a pause, but when he realized Hiruzen was simply waiting for him to continue, went on. And he manages to escape. Now, instead of taking back the reins or nominating someone who can clean up the mess Namikaze and his wife left us, you pick him. He stressed the last word, disgust evident. On the other side of the room, if he hadn't been so surprised himself, Uchiha Fugaku probably would have had some scathing words to throw back at him. Instead, he just stood there, stunned. Hiruzen lit his pipe, breathed in and answered slowly. It is not a suggestion. He breathed smoke out. With Minato dead, I'm the acting leader of this village. Fugaku has proven to be a more than competent leader many, many times in the last war. There was no village who hadn't heard of Wicked Eye Fugaku, and if Minato was stronger than him, along with the Sannin, well, they were the only ones. Danzo can see people mulling it over. To his dismay, some seemed to agree. Besides, Hiruzen continued, a bit of amusement seeping in his tone. I already have the daimyo's approval. Fugaku thought. It was a way to bridge the gap that could grow between the village and the Uchiha clan, he knew. Looking at Sarutobi, he also knew that the man believed him to be their best choice. Despite himself, he felt a bit moved. I accept. Fugaku says, simply. It is settled, then. Sarutobi concluded. From now on, Uchiha Fugaku is the fifth Hokage of Konoha. He was the first to bow to him, after handing him the hat. It felt surreal to Fugaku, seeing the man he had looked up to as the pillar of the village for most of his life bow to him. He wondered if this was how Minato had felt. Danzo bowed last, and as shortly as propriety allowed. I won't forget this. He thought. Judging by his wary face, Hiruzen knew it too. Over the course of a bit more than 25 years, Sarutobi Ren, Naruto's new, dead father, had acquired quite a reputation for himself. A cross between a womanizer and a whoremonger. A very average ninja, despite being of the famed Sarutobi clan. An insufferable drunk, who got by coasting on his powerful relatives, who never hesitated to use them to get out of trouble. Until he didn't. He died after provoking the wrong person one too many times. The Sarutobi clan was not particularly sad to hear about it, even though they would not show it publicly. Nor were they too pleased to hear he managed to reproduce, even though they were not really surprised. Still, the Sarutobi took care of their own, so they took him in. In the end, just like Sarutobi Kano Amuro would because of his busy Umbu parents 3 years later, Naruto was mostly raised by Biwako. She knew who he was, and partly because of this, and partly because she also happened to be a stern matron as Kushina herself would have attested. Though she cared about him, she kept distance between the two of them. He was cared for, well-fed, and Biwako taught him how to read early on. Later on, he'd know that compared to what could have happened, and what did happen to many orphans, he got pretty lucky. Still, there are moments he couldn't help but want for more. When Naruto was 5, Sarutobi Hiruzen taught him about chakra. He couldn't afford to show him too much blatant favoritism, and he knew that some clan members were already whispering about him spending too much time with the bastard son of his late nephew. The kid was lonely though, he saw. There were only a few Sarutobi children around his age, and he was not close to any of them. Some parents took pity on him, but that was it. Maybe he would get some friends in the academy, he hoped. Not that there was any choice, in the end. It might have been sad, but Minato and Kushina's son, and a Jinchuriki to boot, if a secret one, would never live a civilian life. The old man didn't expect him to learn how to access it right away, especially considering the fact he had needed to tighten the seal more to hide the 9 tails deeper, but Naruto was a surprisingly fast learner, it seemed. 2 weeks later, he was able to reach for his chakra at will, if in a blunt and unrefined way. He asked for more from Hiruzen, of course. Which he refused, telling him he would learn everything he needed if he only joined the ninja academy. Naruto didn't particularly want to join the academy, but he also wanted to learn more about the strange energy. And he didn't want to disappoint the old man, who was one of the few people he felt didn't want him to be someone else's son. In his spare time, he read a lot, and reached for his chakra as often as he could. He was hooked. The academy was pretty bland, Naruto felt. He did not know much about ninjas yet, though he could guess that the kind of games they played, such as throwing wooden weapons at a vaguely man-shaped target, were a hint about what they actually did. Other than this, he kept on hearing the same mottos about the will of fire, and the importance of bonds. Which he found kind of funny, kind of sad, since his standoffish nature, which he developed after not interacting much with other kids his age, meant he was mostly alone. Nobody was particularly mean to him, but nobody was particularly interested in him either, he thought. He tried to not take it too personally, but it kinda stung. At first. As a reaction to this perceived feeling, he started keeping his own distance as well. Besides, he really did not understand the other children, who were so emotional, compared to the adults he was more used to. He had the old man and Biwako, anyway. Most of the lectures he spent daydreaming, trying to make something happen with his chakra. At home, he pestered the old man for more guidance. He knew he'd end up accepting, if he kept at it every day. He was nothing but stubborn. 5 years after the 9 tails attacked Konoha, the 4th Raikage found himself considering his options. The 5th Hokage, Wicked Eye Fugaku, had offered a peace treaty. They had stopped fighting directly after the last war, but there were still some border skirmishes going on, with some casualties here and there. While he wasn't particularly worried about Konoha, with Namikaze gone, the village was still one of the strongest, likely the second. Right after them, the 4th had torn his way through IWA. This also meant Suna would not try anything foolish. It was not a bad deal, he mused. He scanned over the conditions once more, noting with some amusement that the Hokage offered to set up intense trading routes, likely with the intention of reducing the likelihood of conflict down the line. After all, as long as both of their villages were gaining from it, why ruin a good thing? This was more along the lines of Sarutobi than Namikaze, the Raikage knew. The 4th Hokage had never bothered trading too extensively with his enemies. It didn't start out by his choice, of course, but as long as he had been alive, no sane village was willing to let anything that could potentially bear his Hiraishin mark inside their walls. He likely knew this was the reason, so never pushed the issue during his short reign. Whatever solution he would have found, nobody knew. For a minute, the Raikage considered using this opportunity to get inside Konoha's walls. There were many bloodlines worth stealing in there, and many ways to get at them, too. Hyuga, Uchiha, Akimichi, just to name a few. It would be so easy, so tempting, and he ended up deciding against it. Maybe if it had been Sarutobi, he'd have tried his luck. He knew the man had become a peace-seeker in his old age. Konoha's bloody ape had become known as the Professor, instead. If Namikaze was still at the helm, well, he would not have signed the paper, likely. Their old one-sided rivalry demanded as much. The fourth Raikage agreed to peace with Konoha. Dog. Ram. Bor. Shiba Michio, a second-year student, asked their academy sensei, hesitantly. Close. Dog. Bor. Then Ram, the teacher, stressed the order, kind but firm, while going through the signs himself to make sure the child understood. From his spot behind a nearby tree, Sarutobi Naruto pretended to be busy reading a comic book during his lunch break. He went over the signs mentally himself, making sure to visualize them in as much detail as he could. Dog, left hand flat on right fist. Bor, knuckles facing down, joined together. Ram, left thumb on top, hands together vertically. He still wasn't sure about their purpose, and what about made this specific combination in this specific order allowed one to use the transformation technique, but he knew he had it memorized. Now, to practice. He still wasn't too fond of the idea of becoming a ninja, but had to admit the techniques were pretty nice. Plus, he figured he could always drop out later. With this in mind, he reached deep inside himself, let his chakra flow from his navel to every part of his body, focused around his body, pictured himself as the old man and found himself stuck to the floor. Huh. He thought. Was this supposed to happen? He looked at his hand. Still smooth, unblemished. Probably didn't work then. He tried to stand up, to no avail. This is pretty embarrassing, Naruto thought, as he spent the rest of his lunch break waiting for this new chakra adherence to fade away. In the end, he figured out how to turn it off. Watch this, Sarutobi-sama, Naruto said, 3 days later, once his confidence with the transformation technique grew. Dog, Bor, then Ram. Transformation technique. Hiruzen wondered with some amusement what it was that made young ninjas scream the name of the technique they were about to use. But, he couldn't deny being a little impressed. Naruto's transformation was perfect, and in front of him stood his perfect replica. Not bad, huh? What do you think? Naruto laughed. It was pretty strange, hearing a child's timbre coming out of his own face. This is pretty good. You must have practiced a lot. That's right. And I'll be able to do much more when you teach me. Oh. Hiruzen was amused. And who said anything about another jutsu? Though excited at the non-outright refusal, Naruto kept his face from showing too much enthusiasm. Well, nobody, but everybody knows you know a ton of secret techniques. He thought on it, and added. The teacher said so. Sarutobi pretended to think. It is true that I know a few. But why should I? Come on, old M-. Sarutobi-sama. You're the best ninja in town, everybody knows. He tried buttering him up. Hiruzen wondered what the fifth would think of this, amused. Please, please, please. He sighed. Oh well. I guess one technique couldn't hurt. Umino Iruka didn't know what to think of Sarutobi Naruto. He had been tentatively hopeful that the reclusive but not very shy at all child would open up to some of his classmates, but so far, in the 2 years since he had started the academy, he had mostly kept to himself. It was a pretty strange attitude to see in a 7-year-old, he felt. Not that there were no fair amount of loners in school, far from it, but they usually were more temperamental. Sarutobi was perfectly polite, had no particular problem working with others, but seemed more at ease being alone. Iruka had tried nudging a few of his classmates to interact more with him, but the child seemed to have a knack for shutting conversations down and disappearing after class. He sighed. He couldn't exactly force the kid to make friends, could he? Besides, he was doing fine, staying somewhere near the top of the class. Who was he to say anything? The jutsu Sarutobi-sama ended up teaching him was not much of one yet, Naruto thought. He had just given him some vague instructions about trying to mold his chakra in the shape of a tool and project it outside his body. When Naruto asked for something more specific, Hiruzen had just looked away, told him something like chains, swords, whatever. Anything you feel any affinity towards should work, really. Naruto had the feeling the old man was being vague on purpose. And that once he'd managed to do it, he'd just give him this annoying, knowing look that told Naruto that this was exactly what he had expected. Which is how he had spent the better part of the last 2 years trying to create some tools out of chakra. Worst part was, anytime he had asked other people about it, they just seemed skeptical about the whole thing. Sounds more like a bloodline thing to me, kid. You're wasting your time. Go back to school. Summoning weapons? Like, from a scroll. He'd read of a few people from the Nagan Uzumaki clan that had the ability to project chakra chains, but this had apparently been attributed to their special clan abilities. Really, if it weren't for Sarutobi-sama insisting that for some mysterious reason, he was likely to have an ability for it, he would have moved on to something else a long time ago. Tobi. He tried to picture a weapon in his mind. The first thing that came to him was a sword, naturally. Why naturally? Well, as mature as he tried to be, Naruto was still a child. Nothing really seemed to represent a ninja tool more than an elegant, shiny sword. First came the Scaba. Sarutobi. Yes, sensei. His class was looking at him expectantly. He looked around. An Uchiha Sasuke, or maybe Toru, he wasn't sure which one was who was standing in the middle of the arena, waiting. Iruka stood with his hands on his hips, his nostrils flared. Oh, it's my turn already. Naruto thought. He had mostly forgotten about the taijutsu practice, lost as he was in thought. He stepped in the ring hurriedly, bowed and joined his fingers in the seal of reconciliation with his soon-to-be opponent. They both stepped back and circled each other. They were both looking for an opening. Sasuke Toru moved first. He was fast, likely faster than Naruto. His left hand came out, a fist aimed at Naruto's face, which he deviated with his right hand. He retaliated with a spinning kick, and Sasuke jumped over it. The next second, he threw a swift kick at Naruto's ribs. He choked on his breath and threw some distance between them. God! Why did he want to become a ninja, again? This sucked. Naruto ran back towards Sasuke, and threw a haymaker at him, which he dodged. He also flipped over his following roundhouse kick, using his shoulders as a spring. Frustrated, Naruto managed to elbow him in the face. Sasuke fell in a heap, without much of his usual grace. That's not fair. You fight dirty. He shouted. Naruto didn't say anything, opting to try to kick him in the belly instead. Sasuke rolled away from him. Then kicked him in the shin. Naruto yelped and tried to pull his hair. Iruka slapped a hand over his face. What was the point of teaching them katas if they just reverted to brawling whenever they got frustrated? This is taijutsu practice, boys. He started it. It's his fault, sensei. They shouted simultaneously. I don't care, keep it together or it's scrubbing floorboards for both of you. Sasuke seemed to remember where he was and reverted to his usual Uchiha taijutsu style. He came at Naruto. A fist was blocked. A palm slapped away his left leg. Punch from the left. Haymaker. A knee aimed to Naruto's face. Another flip followed by a kick. Somehow, Naruto was starting to see a rhythm to this. And some part of him was enjoying it, even. He threw a kick that Sasuke parried. The dance resumed. After almost a minute of this, they were both panting. Sasuke, he was pretty sure it was his name, was faster, for sure, but Naruto seemed to have more stamina, overall. Which meant that at this point of the fight, the speed advantage was pretty much negligible. When he came running at him, fist cocked back, Naruto did the same, aiming at his face. He planned to wait until the last moment, and then duck under Sasuke's punch, catching him with a rising kick. It would look very impressive, he was sure. 1 step. He heard his own heavy breathing. 2 steps. 3 steps. Anytime now. 4 steps. Was he imagining the outline of a man standing behind Sasuke? 5 steps. Naruto met Sasuke's eyes. A voice boomed in his head, jubilant and full of resentment at the same time. He saw Sasuke's eyes widen at the same time as his own did. I finally found you, Azura. 6 steps. Sasuke's punch connected, and Naruto saw stars. Chapter 3, Burning of the Midnight Flame. The temple's steps shook when a piece of the wall fell. The night sky lay indifferent, as full of stars as it had been on the night of their wedding. The temple burned by his hand, and had he managed to bring back his distant mind to the horrible reality of what he had just done, he would have had to hear his wife's screams as the fire consumed her. He was Indra. This was who he was. Who he was meant to be, his dreams told him as much. Except, he knew, this was not the full truth. He was born as Asahi, from no clan. He was a simple farmer, and had never known his father. Whenever he had asked his mother about him, back when she was still alive, she had just told him he was a strong ninja from a powerful clan, and someday he'd come back for them. He never had. When he had married Yuki, who was the daughter of a rich merchant, he thought that luck was finally smiling upon him. The dreams had started a long time ago. Of fires, wars, and strife. Of blood and kinship. Of a cycle that would not break. Until he had found Yuki in bed with his own half-brother, he had been ignoring them just fine. Pain brought him back to himself. His eyes seemed to be on fire, and he tried to rub at them. He opened them. Asahi screamed. It was a scream that came from deep within, something he could not stop. Liquid fire seemed to course through his veins. His eyes were dripping blood. And yet he saw more clearly than he ever did. His eyes fell on the temple. When he saw the charred body resting upon the altar, and his awakened eyes recognized the burned remains of the necklace he had once offered his wife, his scream made the previous one sound like a whimper. The air seemed to be set ablaze. The trees burned. A purple shape rose around him, in the form of a skull. He was Indra. Naruto woke up on the floor of the ring. Iruka-sensei seemed worried, judging by his face. So was Sasuke, behind him. Are you alright? Wazat. He answered coherently. You got knocked out. Wasn't. Why were his thoughts so jumbled up? You were. Sasuke said. His own cheek was bruised. Wasn't. How do you explain waking up on the floor then? I was taking a nap. Enough, boys. This is the end for today's practice. Naruto, please stop by the infirmary before you leave. Iruka-sensei said, firmly. They mumbled their agreement and formed the seal. It was strange, Sarutobi Hiruzen thought. Something about Naruto seemed different, since he came back with his face swollen after the academy, weeks ago. Something seemed to be on his mind. He hoped this was not about the adamantine chains. Sure, he had a hunch that Naruto might have the potential for them, and they would definitely serve him well if such was the case, but there was no certainty here. Just because Kushina had them did not mean her son would be able to use them. But he had figured there would be no harm in trying, as it would help the boy become more familiar with his chakra, and the process to shape it. Sarutobi sighed. It was probably the reason Naruto was down. He decided to try to cheer him up by getting him started with elemental manipulation. This ought to cheer him up. Lightning. He thought. This made no sense. Minato had been civilian-born, and purely wind-natured, and Kushina had an affinity for both wind and water. Chakra natures very rarely appeared out of nowhere, and certainly not this strong. It was not unheard of for a weak affinity to pop up in ninja families after a couple generations, sure. But a lightning nature this strong had not been seen outside of Kumo since Uchiha Madara. He had expected Naruto to be wind-natured, with water as a possible secondary. Instead, the boy showed a very strong lightning affinity, as well as a wind affinity as strong as his parents. Is this good, old M-? Sarutobi-sama? Naruto asked, anxious but excited. This is good, yes. Sarutobi recovered. Both lightning and wind are very useful for battle. Naruto made a face. And besides this? Is there anything cool I can do with them? Sarutobi laughed. Yes, they are both very versatile. You could learn to use lightning to move extremely fast, to immobilize someone, augment your reaction time, or shield yourself. Naruto was interested in most of these. They had started learning what being a ninja really meant in the academy recently. He could not say he was very fond of the idea of killing people. His father had been killed, apparently. He didn't like the idea of doing it to someone else. If learning how to use lightning meant he'd become strong enough not to have to kill people, then he'd become as good with it as he could. What about wind? Is it useful? Definitely. First, you could. 3 years had passed since Naruto had entered the academy. It was just as boring as it always had been. He had made a lot of progress in the last year, since he had learned about his chakra natures. The main reason he was still there, and never bothered to try to pass the exam early, was that he still wasn't sure if he wanted to bother about actually becoming a ninja. It seemed there were lots of restrictions that came with being one. Such as basically never being allowed to resign without a valid reason. Or leaving the village for good. Something about village secrets, he thought. So he toyed with the idea of dropping out. Sure, Sarutobi-sama would be disappointed, but maybe he wouldn't mind that much. His mind was wandering again. Sarutobi-sama had told him time and again that this lack of focus was the reason he was having trouble with his elemental training. Well, Sarutobi-sama was great, but he was old school. Sitting fully still was something he found difficult. Some days especially, there was a restless energy about him, and he wanted to run fast. So he did. Wind still eluded him, but he was getting very close to being able to use lightning release. He could produce sparks if he tried hard enough, and that was about it, for now. He ran. Naruto did speed drills most days, now. Ever since Sarutobi-sama had told him that even if lightning release could make him faster, this didn't mean much if his base speed was not high enough. He was pretty fast, by now. Probably faster than most genin, but that was just his own humble estimation. He was daydreaming again. He didn't stop it this time. Lightning was supposed to be used by converting your chakra to electricity. The old man had told him the basics of it. Some sort of electric cells jumped from particle to particle in some specific material. This was how he tried to see lightning today. A jump from one end to the other. The pressure he applied on himself to jump would hopefully determine his speed. He continued to run, and let his chakra flow inside him. He cycled it. Once. Twice. He forced himself to go faster. He pictured himself as the electricity carrier, lightning dancing across his skin. He imagined himself moving from one point to the other, just like an electric charge through a conductive material. Naruto ran as hard as he could, now. He felt his chakra pricking, tingling around him, and the smell of ozone in the air. His chakra tensed in a way he'd never experienced before. He pushed. The world blurred around Naruto as he jumped forward at a speed he would never have thought possible before this day. His eyes couldn't follow, and his body seemed to cramp at the height of his jump, but as he fell back towards the ground, the only thing he felt was an exhilarating freedom. He would make this his. This, he promised. Sitting there in his yukata and smiling blandly for their guests, Naruto realized there were a few of the Sarutobi traditions that he did mind. Their reputation as generalists meant that he probably spent more time making sure he was well-rounded than most of his classmates, but it wasn't too bad. The old man always said that balance was necessary, and this was the reason he had to learn how to play a musical instrument. He had picked the koto. The heavy emphasis they put on the will of fire was more annoying, he found. He had his own doubts about it but kept this to himself. Now, the yearly joint parties with the Akimichi, Nara, and Yamanaka clans. This, he did mind. Not that he had anything against Koji or Shikamaru, he did not mind spending some time with them. Or even Ino, for the matter, if in smaller doses. Teasing Asuma about his girlfriend was fun, too. He was surprisingly shy, for a bear. But spending the whole day here? That was way too long. He could have used the time to practice, to read, to draw. Anything. Truth be told, he just had trouble with large groups of people, which tended to exhaust him. Somebody clapped their hands, way too close to his ears. Ah. I finally found you, Naruto. Apparently, Ino had been looking for him. Good evening, Ino-san. he said, nodding. Always so stiff. Boring. Ino sighed. Let's go. Go where? Anywhere. Further down the garden, Yamanaka Inoichi shot him a commiserating look. Apparently, he was used to his daughter's bossy ways. Why don't you go with Koji, or Shikamaru even? She made a face. They're the laziest guys ever. I'm sure they're watching the clouds somewhere or eating chips. This was true. Why not both? He asked flatly. She giggled. See? You can be funny, too. Thanks. So. She waited for his answer, hands on her hips. Why me? There were plenty of clan kids around their age today, and Ino was a popular girl, he figured. Because we're friends, stupid. Oh. He had never gotten the notice. Well, this wasn't too bad, anyways. He followed her without really knowing why. It seemed some of the weight had left his shoulders. Being Ino's friend meant knowing Sakura. It also meant hearing in on much more gossip than he'd signed for. Suzuki had not seemed to know what to make of him since their bout, 1 year ago. Sometimes he would steal glances at him, wondering what their temporary connection was about. Naruto did not know either. So they settled for nodding at each other, and sometimes sitting together, silently. Koji and Shikamaru would sometimes hang out around him, too. It also meant Naruto was never really alone anymore. 2 months had passed. Naruto hadn't managed to replicate his feat of performing a lightning-enhanced jump. It seemed this had been a stroke of luck. Progress was scarce, and he was a bit frustrated. He had wanted to show Sarutobi-sama, who hadn't seemed too surprised by either thing. Well, he said, puffing at his pipe. The old man was really smoking very freely, these days. Just because it happened once doesn't mean you achieved mastery. Naruto deflated. But it does mean something. You can learn how to do it on command. It's just going to dash. Take more practice, I know. He grumbled. It seemed that he was spending all of his time practicing something, some days. Exactly. When Sarutobi left, Naruto practiced his transformation technique instead, frustrated beyond measure. Transforming into an animal could be helpful someday, so he spent the afternoon bird watching. Not because he wanted some rest. In front of the classroom stood the 5th Hokage. He was wearing a pure white cloak over traditional Uchiha fatigues, and the red and white hat sat upon his head. He gave the impression of a powerful man, if one who didn't sleep enough. Stern but kind. Loving but unbending. He occupied both the role of the Fire Shadow, as well as the head of the Uchiha clan. Uchiha Fugaku had come to encourage the students before the exam. It seemed to be working, Naruto thought, looking around him and seeing the hopeful face of his classmates. Well, probably not on him. He had learned something that there stood an obstacle in his drop out of the academy and learn about chakra by himself plan. There was simply no way to resign from the academy this late. He had tried asking the teachers politely, and less politely too. You either got out before the end of the first year or you were on your way to join the corps. Which meant he'd only have one option. Sabotage himself. He'd fail the exam and force the teacher's hand. Which might look suspicious since he usually was a top 3 student. What do you mean, you failed? Ino screeched. This makes no sense at all, you know all 3 of the academy techniques, I've seen you use them. Naruto winced at her volume. Ino really was emotional. At least Biwako would likely not be so loud. He shrugged. Guess I must have panicked. You're about as anxious as Shikamaru. So not very much. You never know when nerves will get you. What are you going to do with your life? She threw her hands in the air. Ino-san, I'm 11. Still. Why do you care so much? Well, I thought that maybe we could have been on a team together, with Sakura. Wouldn't it have been nice? She seemed shyer than usual, somehow. He wondered why. Nah, I think the teachers, he thought. Or maybe the Hokage, I don't know who makes the teams. Well, someone had already decided that you'd be on a team with Shikamaru and Koji. With Asuma as your teacher. She frowned. Now it doesn't seem like I have a choice, with you out of the game. Naruto held back a smile. Now he could finally focus on learning more about chakra, without this pesky ninja thing in the way. Don't worry, Ino-san. We'll always be friends. She blushed and looked away. I know, stupid. Who else would want to hang out with someone so stiff anyways? What do you mean, the Genin Reserve Corps? Naruto screeched. Hiruzen winced at his volume. Naruto really was emotional, sometimes. He continued working on his painting, as if unbothered. Well, that's where the people who still manage to fail the exam after 6 years in the academy go. He shrugged. But wouldn't want to waste all this ninja training, right? Sarutobi-sama, the traitor, had the audacity to wink at him. But I failed. How can I be a ninja if I don't know the basics? Sarutobi laughed. Don't think you're the first person trying to bend the rules. Once you enter the academy, you're in. Seeing Naruto's face, he sobered. But I understand your dilemma. Being a ninja is hard, and requires a lot of sacrifices. Naruto looked up, surprised. Sarutobi was looking through the window, melancholic. We live in a pretty messed up world, don't we? You either remain powerless, at the mercy of anyone stronger. Naruto was hanging on to his words. This had been his dilemma. He had long since realized that no matter what he thought about ninjas, he would have to get stronger if he wanted to be free. Laws and rules were nice, but they meant nothing in the face of a man with enough power to bend a whole village. And there were many such people. Or you learn how to protect yourself and the people you hold dear. Sarutobi-sama was thinking of something else. My father was a great ninja. Sarutobi Sasuke, I believe one of your classmates was named after him. But he knew what being a shinobi also meant. The loss of innocence, and the certainty of becoming a killer. Why did he let you become a ninja then? Naruto blurted. Because he knew that no one can protect everyone. And while he'd prefer to shelter me from the cruelty of this world forever. It was not his choice. But mine. He patted his biceps, still strong, even in his old age. So he trained me the best he could, before he died. And he made sure I never forgot why I was doing it, either. This was part of the tragedy of Konoha, and of the ninja system. As long as you had people you cared for, chances were you would take up the headband yourself. I know you don't seem to think the will of fire is something very tangible. Naruto blushed. Sarutobi-sama laughed. He looked at him, his brown eyes shining with compassion. If you want to renounce the shinobi life, you probably will be able to, in a few years, 4 years, or so depending on the contract. This was the only lie he had told him today. A Jinchuriki would never be allowed not to fight, but neither he nor the village knew about it yet. But the time will come where we might find ourselves at war again. And your friends will be in danger. Naruto thought of Ino, of Sakura, little Kano Amaru, Shikamaru and Koji. Even Sasuke, for some reason. He sighed. I get it. I'll be a ninja, old ma dash. Sarutobi-sama. Well, great. Now get back to train some more. He exclaimed, jovially. Wait, what? Naruto shouted in anger. Well, yes, Sarutobi looked at him slyly. We wouldn't want the worst ninja to get promoted on a technicality, at that to get too far behind. Why you old, Naruto fumed. Especially one who hasn't managed proper elemental manipulation at what? 11? At your age I was already working on my third. He laughed loudly. Truth be told, it was the second. Naruto screamed, and left, slamming the door. He sighed when Naruto was gone. This was no attempt at manipulating the boy, but even if he had tried, he didn't think he could have done better. And to think he was not even the Hokage anymore. It seemed like nobody could really retire from the job alive. Chapter 4, Training for the Job. In the end, Naruto becomes a genin at 12, like most of his class. Well, reserve genin. Which mostly meant getting the chance to do lower-ranked missions and possibly being sent to the front line if a war ever broke again. Today, he got a job as a laborer on a construction site. It could have been decent, If not for the token crazy guy who wouldn't calm down about the dangers of a work site, yada, yada. Honestly, shuriken practice around the academy second years had been way more dangerous. But this guy, who had, according to his endless bluster, been working in the field for more than 30 years, kept telling him how dangerous and corrosive cement was. It probably had to do his poker face, too, he figured, but the man decided to do a demonstration. Konoha was very hot in the summer. The man stuck his sweaty arm up to the shoulder in dry cement, and then spent the whole day working with his arm covered in lime to show him just how much damage it could do to your skin. After a few hours, Naruto could tell he was getting very itchy. When Naruto came back the next day to wrap up his contract, the older man came to work with rubber gloves on, his hands duct-taped. I swear, Sakura-san. I was giggling like Ami anytime I heard his hands squish. He was meeting Sakura for lunch. She laughed while slurping her noodles, in the careless way she did when she didn't feel the need to pretend to be polite. Ino was put on a team with Shikamaru and Koji, with Asuma as her teacher, to no one's surprise. Sakura was put on a team with Sasuke and Toru, both from the Uchiha clan. Wait, so Sasuke and Toru are definitely not the same person, then, right? He asked her. She threw him a weird look. Of course not, why would they be? Nah, never mind, I just thought. They kinda look the same, you know. He said sheepishly. Sakura huffed. That's kinda offensive, not all Uchiha look alike. That's not what I said though, just them. They're cousins. Toru has a half-brother who's a very strong jonin, actually. She explained. But Shisui-san is very busy, so Toru was a bit disappointed. Kurane-sensei is great though, she's almost as good at genjutsu as Shisui-san is. She added quickly, never wanting to be caught talking down her own teacher. Naruto's mind tended to glaze over when he heard anything about genjutsu, so he just nodded. Fuinjutsu practice was hard enough, so he had managed to convince Sarutobi-sama that even as a generalist, studying genjutsu on top of everything else was going to be too much. The old man had agreed, on the condition that he made sure to clean the dojo floorboards twice a week, which was a pain in the ass. Oh, and that he'd still learn how to dispel them, which he'd test by trapping him in a few illusions, from time to time. Still beat having to practice genjutsu. For some reason, despite having decent chakra control, especially considering he apparently had reserves much larger than anybody else his age, the illusory arts had never agreed with him too much. Fuinjutsu was pretty hard too, but he at least enjoyed working on it, and had a few projects he was currently working on. If only he didn't keep getting distracted by the reserve corps thing. Speaking of. And how's the remedial training going, Naruto? It's not remedial training. Whatever you want to call it, then. She held her tongue out, laughing. Everybody in their class knew that for whatever reason, he had thrown the last exam. It had seemed like a brilliant idea at the time, too. He sighed. It's not great, but still better than the academy. I've got short lessons starting early in the morning for 2 hours and dash. What sort? Ever the academic. It's more practical, in general, I feel. I don't think Konoha wants to spend too much resources on us. He laughed, and she shook her head in consternation. For some reason, he seemed to find humor in the whole situation. He continued. Then they let us go for the rest of the morning and we're free to pick a mission or two for the day. Like the construction job today. He mimed bloody, duct-taped hands, and she laughed, playfully swatting his shoulder. Nothing more than D-rank, obviously. Eh? So you're always on your own? Sure. I mean we can also team up if we want to, but the pay is split in 3, then. It's rarely worth it for us, as contractors. We get paid a little less than regular genin, too. D-ranks go from 5,000 ryo to 50,000 for us, I think it was. I mean it's split between us and our sensei, of course, but it's not too bad overall. Yeah, it's about half that for us if we complete them alone, which takes a bit more time. So something like 2,500 ryo minimum. That's not bad at all. I mean, you can't do the job as fast as 3 people, but still, she smiled. He grunted in vague approval. Not that he really enjoyed babysitting all that much, or all the odd jobs that took a few days at a time, but money was money. And he needed supplies for his projects. They lapsed into comfortable silence, and he bid her goodbye as she left for her own mission, something about finding a lost cat. He had some groceries to deliver, so he commiserated. Something about what Sakura had said was stuck in his mind. Morishige Daiichi's punch in his face pulled him out of his reverie and set a teeth loose. Damn, but he really couldn't focus in here. He absent-mindedly parried the incoming elbow, dodged under his vertical kick and delivered 3 fast jabs in his chest. Daiichi folded and their Chunin overseer called the match. If he was being honest with himself, this was a real waste of time, as he was ahead of them, when it came to fighting. He had only made small improvements when it came to lightning manipulation, but even without it, he was faster, and more enduring. He lifted Daiichi up, gave him a polite smile and half listened as they moved on to meditation. It was a practiced routine by now. Then he left for an upscale and he signed a mission for. He thought it was going to be a decent job, at least, maybe he'd learn how to handle employee problems, the workings of the business and well, useful things. They dressed him up in a pressed white shirt, jacket, and formal shoes. And sent him to the back room instead. Turned out the inn hadn't filed anything for the last year and they would hire a genin for cheap to do the filing for them. Sweating over the files in the Konoha swelter sucked. Better than killing people, he mumbled to himself. He got a month's worth of paper cuts in the week it took him to alphabetize all files. It took him 3 more days to read over the sexual harassment complaints, the drunken idiocies and everything in between. They must have loved the work he did, because they offered to take him on a permanent basis. But we'd have to renegotiate the contract as we definitely can't afford to pay as much as your genin cut, but you'd get many other benefits and dash. Nah. The only thing he got from this was a newfound respect for housekeepers. He politely refused and left. He had 3 kids to babysit and a few dogs to get out before the sun set. Damn it. After a month and a half of this, he had saved up enough money to start living in a small but private apartment within the Sarutobi compound. He was mostly alone anyways since the time he had been 8, by Wako being busy at the running the clan medical center most days, and he felt he was taking advantage of her kindness, so he moved out. Well, 5 minutes away walking, less than a minute jumping on the rooftops. Still, it was his own place. The floor was covered in sealing supplies, books on chakra theory and ninjutsu. Well, fantasy, romance novels as well, and a fair amount of comics, but the old man had always been preaching about balance in all things, so. At 6 in the morning, bleary-eyed, as he was still not a morning person, he set out for the daily training. The Chunin yawned at them, asked them to start sparring, or something. Then he pulled a tattered book out and started reading. Anything more specific? Naruto grumbled back. Just do whatever you were supposed to learn at the academy, kid. He went back to his book. Something snapped inside him. He left without saying his goodbyes. The Chunin lifted one eyebrow, and then continued reading. Old man. I can't bear this anymore. He had gone back to the compound, forsaking the mission office for the day. Oh. Hiruzen looked at him upside down, as he was currently laying in his garden, lazing under the sun. Bear what, exactly? Next to him, a monkey gave him the same unimpressed expression. The old man had taken to summoning them for more and more frivolous reasons, these days. Everything. Don't get depressed on me, now. The third reached for his pipe, which the monkey had tried to grab while he was distracted. You know exactly what I mean. The useless training, the endless steam of ranks. Well, he tried to avoid smirking. You kind of brought it upon yourself, what with the whole failing the exam thing. Naruto harumphed. Look, I got it. Now how do I get out of this? Pass the test, become a genin. No way. Enjoy your ranks, then. He went back to eating the grapes one monkey was feeding him, uninterested. Naruto hesitated. Sarutobi opened an eye, sensing weakness. Teach me the Kage Bunshin. Please. Huh. This was more interesting. Now. Why would I do this? Hiruzen asked. I'll use it to complete missions more efficiently. He answered, hoping Sarutobi-sama wouldn't probe him. "And I'll also clean your office every week," he threw in the mix. "Wouldn't this be encouraging some of your worst habits?" The old man was just provoking him. Naruto knew he had him. "You do exactly the same to get out of work. Lies, and slander too. That's not really the way to convince a poor old man." "Oh yeah, then why did I see you in the office when I came here? I'm still faster than you, probably." Truth be told, there was a clone of his doing his work for him. Well, there was no question Naruto had the reserves for it. Maybe he'd teach him a trick or two about the technique, too. The boy was progressing fast, by any standards. And he had trained Orochimaru, so he knew a thing or two about outliers. But was it fast enough for the kind of trouble that was likely to come his way, as his parents' son, and a Jinchuriki? He wasn't about to force him to do more than this, yet. There would come a time he would need to be trained, but Naruto was already doing as much as he could without burning himself out, when it came to training. And if the boy ever noticed that a few of the chakra theory, physical training scrolls he found on the floor of his room were written by Hiruzen's own hand. Naruto never said anything. He mulled the idea over, then stood up. "What's my name?" "Sarutobi-sensei." "That will do. The best part of this, is that there really isn't much to teach. So it's just this one hand seal?" "Yup. Well, a tiger or horse seal will do too, actually." "What's the point of them, then?" Naruto asked, a bit dumbfounded. Hiruzen shrugged. "It helps you focus, mostly. I don't always bother, but I know some people might need them." Now this was a pretty open lie, as it was much easier to use at least some hand seals for jutsu. But Naruto seemed to run a bit further when he gave him the adequate incentive. Mostly pride, really. It was kind of cute, watching him try to do the impossible just because he had said it was pretty easy to him. It reminded him of Kano Amaru, really. Naruto grunted and put his hands in the shape of the clone seal. Hiruzen yawned, sat down in front of him. A perfect replica of the old man appeared seamlessly next to him, standing. One moment he was one. The next he was two. Naruto's nostrils flared. The clone threw a book at his head. He didn't manage to dodge. "Aren't you supposed to be a ninja?" He managed to learn the Kage Bunshin in a few hours, with the old man sporadically trying to distract him. He had gotten the basics of the technique from him. It was way better than what he had expected, too. For most ninjas, the minimum amount a clone would take to form was a lot of chakra, which is why they would almost never bother making more than 2. 3 would likely drain too much chakra to be of any use, and 4 would probably mean a trip to the hospital. For some reason, this didn't seem to apply to him. You could put more or less chakra in a clone, and their durability would be directly correlated to the amount. They likely wouldn't be very durable when it came to being hit, since this was affected more by the quality of the chakra you used to form the technique, according to Sarutobi-sensei. Quality seemed to be a fancy word for something that derived from control, and it took experience. For now, Naruto would settle for 4 clones for daily use. Any more and the accumulated exhaustion they would feed back to him when they dispelled themselves would likely be too much to be sustainable long-term. And Hiruzen wasn't sure what prolonged use of the technique would do on a developing mind anyway, so he preferred to take it slow. This also had the advantage of leaving Naruto with more than enough chakra to go through his day. And for his clones to take care of menial work. Like Diranks. Now, he needed to plan how to put this to good use. Chapter 5, Training for the Job 2. Naruto woke up at dawn, bleary-eyed. He formed the clone seal, and his replica appeared in a puff of smoke next to him, with about a third of his chakra. The clone grumbled a bit, just as tired as he was, but didn't complain as he set out for the training fields. The original Naruto considered going back to bed once the clone had left, but decided against it. That'd just be proving the old man right. Instead, he created 3 other clones by using half his remaining chakra. The clones would pop up with around a tenth of his full chakra reserves and would not be as durable as the first one he had created, but they didn't need to be. There was a pretty basic Fuinjutsu project he had been waiting to complete, and 4 pairs of hands, when they were his, were better than 1. The thing with sealing was that once you knew exactly what you were going for, you could skip on many of the details. 4 written seals could be compacted into one, as long as you had a very clear vision of what you were going for. He'd read about the 4th Hokage's ability to apply his high-ration tag by a simple touch. If this kind of thing was possible, he would learn it. But he wasn't there yet, so he painstakingly wrote down every single symbol anytime he needed something done. He knew what he was going for though, and in about 2 hours, he and his clones had completed the job. They high-fived and he dispelled them. Their memories returned to him, as Sarutobi-sama had said they would, with as much clarity as if he had been the one writing their part. He could definitely use this. He was a bit tired, though, as if he had spent the whole day doing this, which in a way, he had. 2 hours of focused work multiplied by 4 added up pretty quickly. The other downside was that his chakra levels only started to recover once the clones were dispelled. The chakra he gave them at creation stayed with them, and they could only replenish it at a much slower rate for themselves. Which meant he would have to dispel clones on a daily basis, at most, to be efficient. He formed a few seals. Bird, dog, rat. He held rat, and focused his chakra through the central seal. The other symbols retraced, fusing with them to form the seal's compact version. He held up the white piece of fabric the seal was written on. He wrapped it around his arm, at the end of his short-sleeved navy t-shirt. It was a basic seal, one that would turn colors, going from light blue to dark the more chakra it picked up. This was the simplest way he had found out to be able to identify which clone was which if they met under a transformation technique in town. He had a few ideas in mind. It also made it much easier for them to organize themselves without shouting over each other. He only made use of up to 10 clones, but it never hurt to be prepared, anyways. He ate lunch and meditated for an hour. His last remaining clone had dispelled a while ago, and now he was almost back at full capacity. He left through the window, like cool people always did. At the mission/service office, he browsed through the options, and settled for a few. The clerk gave him a dubious look when he walked out with 4 in tow, but he wasn't breaking any rule, so he let him be. He reviewed them again, and thought about the best way to go at it. Uni student, need moving fast. Urgent help needed for painting fence. Announcement, looking for youthful training partner for the day, laughing face, bird and farm animal rescue. Definitely not the most interesting pick he had gotten, but hey, beggars couldn't be choosers. Just to be sure nobody would give him trouble, he waited until he was out of the building. Then, he used about half his chakra to create a few clones, one with 1/8 of his chakra, who would spend the day painting fences, and 2 others with the rest of the spent chakra divided among them. He was pleased to notice the armbands were working as intended, with the weaker clones being a very pale shade of blue, and the 2 others being a bit darker. His own was still dark blue, if lighter than before. He handed each clone their scroll, which he hadn't bothered cloning. They split off, knowing they needed to make sure not to dispel themselves accidentally. If they did, well, he'd have to figure it out. In retrospect, maybe it had been risky to head out on a mission he knew next to nothing about. He leaned to the side to avoid the punch Rock Lee had thrown at him, narrowly missed it, and tried to send a kick back. He'd been practicing hand-to-hand combat for a while, and had never slacked off, but the older kid was definitely better than him, by a wide margin. It was not just the fact that he had 1 more year of experience on him, but his movements were fluid, practiced. Fast and strong. Lee grabbed his leg, and in a move Naruto thought shouldn't have been possible, threw him one-handedly. His back hit a tree and he tasted blood. Lee's teammates, a Hyuga named Niji, and a girl who said she was Tenten, both winced in sympathy. Naruto conceded, and Lee brought him up on his feet with a dazzling smile. "That was a great fight, Naruto-san," he exclaimed. "Yeah. Sure, thanks for having me." Naruto was out of breath, which was pretty uncommon for him, unless Sarutobi-sama was feeling particularly dickish when he improvised his training schedule. "Let's have another round." Cold sweat poured down his forehead. Niji saw his trouble and intervened. "Lee, let Naruto-san have some rest. He's exhausted, I don't need my eyes to see that." "Oh, sorry, my bad, Naruto-san," Lee said sheepishly. Naruto threw Niji a look so full of gratitude that he had to chuckle. Lee went to talk with his sensei, a man who looked exactly like him, or was it the opposite, technically? Niji handed him a can of water, and both of them sat down with Tenten. Lee is a great guy, really. Tenten started. But he can really get carried away. Niji finished, amused. Tell me about it. Naruto said, dryly. How did you even meet him? Tenten queried. I saw a job posting for a D rank and here I am. He gestured at himself self-deprecatingly. Ah. Yes, Lee is always looking for different sparring partners. He's a bit too used to fighting only with us, and we know each other's tricks. Niji shrugged. Do you guys specialize in anything? Niji pointed at his eyes with a wry look. Likely gentle fist, then. Yes. What about you, Tenten? Mostly weapons. Long range, short range. Anything, really. She shrugged. I heard the Sarutobi clan tends to focus on fire style and short range, is it true? Yes, usually. He said, sheepishly. But Sarutobi-sama is training me to be more of a generalist. And my affinity is lightning anyways. I still train with weapons, though. He added, with a bit of distaste. Niji picked up on it. You don't like this? He stated more than he asked. Well, I enjoy the practice but I don't really want to hurt, kill people. If I'm being honest. Tenten nodded. I get that. Shinobi life can be rough sometimes. She said with a distant look. All 3 genin of Team Guy had already killed. It was inevitable in their line of work, and they knew it. There are some practices in this village that I abhor. Niji said with a dark look. If it were up to me. He shook his head. But it's not. Some traditions. He stopped himself, as if he realized he had said too much. Naruto nodded. There was not that much to add, really. He felt the same. After bidding his goodbyes to Team Guy, promising to meet again, for free this time, they joked he crawled back home. It was already 4 in the evening. The clones were done with their day, but he had instructed them himself, maybe? Not to dispel before all of them were home. So the 4 of them were a bit cramped, in his tiny apartment. He had promised Ino and Sakura to meet them for dinner later. He counted the money he had made today, which amounted to around 17,000 ryo. Not bad for one day's work, he felt. Looking at the clones, he saw their armbands were now getting pretty pale. They agreed to dispel themselves. He passed out. He woke up on the floor at around 4 in the morning. He had a light headache, and remembered living 4 different days, too, which was a bit strange. Ah, shit. He missed the dinner and knew Ino would be pissed about it. I might need to practice this one a bit. He mumbled. He summoned a clone to attend practice, crawled to his bed and finished his night. The clone woke him up at noon, and he decided on sending only 2, each with a third of his chakra to the mission office for today. He found Ino's team eating lunch at their usual joint with their sensei, after training. Asuma winked at him, and mimed getting his head cut off. Ino was definitely looking petulant and she made a point of ignoring him even after he apologized, so he shrugged and hung out with Shikamaru and Koji instead. This seemed to do the trick, as she didn't particularly enjoy being left alone herself. Over the next week, he perfected his routine. He'd stay in during the morning and send a clone to practice. Then when this one came back, he'd create 3 clones, keeping a third of his chakra to himself to run odd jobs. One of them would pick up 3 missions and meet the others to divide them among them. They focused on easy jobs that ran no real risk of dispelling them. If the guy at the mission office noticed, he didn't say anything. The clients were happy, and the missions got completed on time, he figured. Hiruzen knew exactly what he was doing, if his knowing smile was any indication. Still, he took a more active role in training him during the day, his own clone taking care of the busy work. Or the reverse, on some days. Speed drills, katas, weapons training and lightning manipulation made up most of his days. He settled into his routine, and the accumulated mental exhaustion he got from his clones dispelling became less and less. After 3 weeks, He felt confident enough to send a fourth clone to run missions, which was a nice productivity increase. He saved most of his money up, and what he didn't, he used to buy supplies and books. Another month passed, and he became able to leave 2 low chakra clones at home, doing his reading for him, which freed even more time. At some point he realized he had completed more than 150 D ranks, when most of his classmates had done less than half that. He was probably the wealthiest of them, clan funds notwithstanding. It was kinda strange to him, as he was probably the least interested in actually being a ninja. Property was still cheap in Konoha. Maybe it was the war, maybe it was the Nine Tails. Maybe it was because it was still relatively new, as far as towns went. In 3-4 more months of this, on top of the money from his orphan pension he had saved over the years, he would have had enough money saved up to outright buy the apartment he was renting, he hoped. It took a little bit longer, so 6 months and a half later, around the time he turned 12, he tried to do exactly that. His clones were running through the usual routine, and Sarutobi Kimiko, the clan's real estate manager, agreed to meet him. She was an older woman, with her brown hair in a tight knot whose stern demeanor reminded him of Biwako. "I admit that I am very surprised, Naruto-san," she began. "You managed to save up quite a lot of money in a very short amount of time. As a reserve genin, on top of it. How did you manage?" I have my ways." He waved off. "Did Sarutobi-sama help you, maybe?" she asked, trying to keep judgment out of her voice. Everybody knew the third had a soft spot for his grandnephew. "No," he said, a bit more harshly than he intended. He amended himself. "Kimiko-san, Sarutobi-sama did not give me money. He taught me much, but he's never one for handouts." She probably knew this, because she nodded after thinking for a few seconds. "As for your request, the place you're looking to buy is valued at around 820,000 ryo." He nodded as he knew as much. "As you have the amount saved up, this is not the problem. However," she continued. "Oh." He wondered what this was about. "This is clan property," she added. He nodded. "Yes. I know." She looked at him blankly. "So? Well, you're not a civilian. As an enrolled shinobi, you're not allowed to buy clan property before you reach Jonin rank," Kimiko said, as if this were the most obvious thing in the world. "Wait, really?" "Yes, really." She saw his disappointed face, and softened a bit. "You're not the first to face this problem. Most people who intend to buy property are older, but this has happened before." "But, why?" "Mostly for historical reasons, I'm afraid." The truth was, giving individual ninjas their own land before they had strong ties to their clan and/or village now was a big risk. It would have given them income independent from their duty. This was the reason why they usually lived in clan compounds, where property was seldom sold out to individual families. Houses tended to be rented out to them instead, and orphans would get stipends, depending on clan rules. This would also have the benefit of creating bustling mini-cities inside clan domains. "So there's no way for me to buy." "Technically, you could ask somebody of Jonin rank to buy in their name and hold it for you." She shrugged. There was nothing out of the ordinary here, and many people used this workaround. It would likely mean paying somebody more than he intended, or fanning the flames of the rumors of favoritism he was already subject to. She caught his expression and nodded. She had thought as much. The other solution would be to move out of the compound. You wouldn't be the first one, either. He realized this was true. While he had lived here his whole life, there was nothing preventing him from moving out. A long silence stretched out. "You could also wait until you're a Jonin, of course." "Allah. Think about it," he answered. In the end, moving out is what he ended up doing. He had a few things he intended to do in the future that would involve privacy, so maybe this was just moving a bit faster than he intended. He visited 10 properties before settling on one. There was a tiny house in one of Konoha's numerous civilian residential areas that was undervalued. The reason was obvious, it was in dire need of repairs. The windows were broken, the grass was overgrown, and there was a roof in the ceiling. The water ran brown, and there was no electricity to be seen. The seller seemed to be surprised he actually wanted it, so they worked out a price that satisfied both of them. He took the next week off from work. Well, his clones did, technically, and started doing whatever he knew he could. Naruto had learned a few things by now, working odd jobs, so cutting down the grass only took the better part of one day, with clones. On Tuesday, they picked up the rotting leaves from both in and out the house, as well as the debris laying around. He fixed the walls and the flooring over the next 3 days, and took care of the windows after that. The more technical parts, he knew he'd have to get some help with. Once that was done, he would seal his few possessions, mostly tools, in a scroll and bring everything over. Then he could get started with the part that he needed the privacy for. Might hire a reserve genin to do the job. He snorted. His domestic routine came to an end the day he was recruited by a pair of chunin to join them on a backup mission. It was a C rank technically, but his little track record had started being noticed and somebody must have spread the word. So when Haganakatetsu and Kamizuki Izumo, usually on guard duty, knocked at his door, along with 2 older genin, explaining that the person they were supposed to go with had gotten injured while training this very morning and was thus unable to join them. For some reason, he let himself be convinced. Once he got ready and they left the village, they briefed him about the specifics. "Who are we backing up, exactly?" Naruto asked, as they leapt from one branch to the next. "Team 5, I think." One of the genin asked. "No, it's Team 6. Katetsu corrected. "Isn't this Team Kurane?" Naruto asked, as something cold settled in his pit. Sakura was on Team Kurane. They usually met every week, and now that he thought of it, she had said she'd be leaving soon. That was more than a week ago. "Yup, that's them." Izumo nodded. Kurane and her team were sent on a spying mission along the rain borders and she requested backup. She's an amazing ninja, but she only got promoted to Jonin recently, and I think she's a bit worried. Seeing Naruto's expression, he added. "But don't worry, Sarutobi-san. It should just be a routine backup mission." Chapter 6, Monsoon. Long before the Uchiha clan was born, Raijin walked the earth. He was a gentle child, and despite growing during a famine, he never let his circumstances define him. He was beautiful and strong, the pride of his family. His features were sharp, his hair pure black and his eyes piercing. But before he had been any of these things, he was clever. As he grows into his power, the people around him trust him with more and more responsibilities. He was a storm of lightning and flame on the battlefield, and he trampled over the people who dared attack his tribe. It wasn't long before he commanded an army of 200 men. But he was still very young. When their most hated foe offered them a peace treaty, despite everybody else's pleas, he accepted. "What is the use of learning about the past?" he said. "If we can't move on from it." He knew of the rumors surrounding the Hell Lake clan, but if he couldn't rise above this sort of thing as a leader, nobody would. He went with his father and 20 of his best men, in neutral territory. It turned out to be a trap, of course. His father and friends were killed in front of him, and he ended up being the only survivor. Later, when he finds his way back to their compound, he only finds ruin. When they send him his mother's head back, he breaks. Until then, he had never known failure. Everybody he held dear was dead, and it was his fault. Later on, when he becomes his era's most terrifying figure, he remembers this moment as the start. Naruto woke up with a gasp. Where am I? He was sleeping in a tent, it seemed. He heard insects buzzing and saw the light of a campfire through the opening flap. Oh, right. They had met up with Kurane's team after close to 5 days, including breaks. He had tried his best to ignore the last dream. He had pretended that the voice he had heard more than a year ago had been something brought on by exhaustion. Looking at his shaky hands, he knew that no matter what it was exactly, he couldn't keep his head in the sand. But where did you go exactly from there? Naruto wasn't sure what they did with mentally disturbed genin reserve genin exactly, and wasn't sure he cared to find out. He went out of his tent, as he couldn't sleep anyways. There was a woman with jet black, curly hair sitting on a log near the campfire. Yui Kurane, Team 6 Sensei, Inasuma's more or less secret girlfriend. Can't sleep, I take it? She asked. No. Had some strange dreams. Sorry to hear that. If you'd like, I could put you to sleep. She shrugged. You can do that. She smirked. Genjutsu has a lot of applications. It would be child's play to help someone willing to fall back into sleep. Huh. I didn't know that. Well. It's the only way some career ninjas manage to sleep. Besides pills, I mean. He winced and they lapsed into silence. You're a close friend of Sakura, aren't you? He had never really stopped to consider their closeness, in truth. She continued. She talks about you often, just like she talks about Ino, so the rest was easy to figure out. Yes. I think we are. He decided, feeling some warmth in his stomach he hadn't expected. She smiled, and it lit her eyes. She was beautiful, he thought. Good. Friends are crucial in our line of work, more than anything else. How is Sakura-san? Kurane was proud, it was clear as day. She's growing stronger each day. She mused. I never met anyone with such fine control over their chakra. And such a willingness to learn too. Truth be told, she's like the perfect student for me. She laughed. I'm glad. Not that Sasuke and Toru are bad, far from it. Kurane amended. Both of them are very competitive, in a friendly way. Naruto snorted. He definitely had noticed an intense competitive streak in both of them, the few times he had seen them train. And I think that with brothers such as Itachi and Shisui, they probably feel like they have a long shadow to get out of. She thought. Well, maybe I shouldn't be saying that out loud. Shisui, he knew of. Some hotshot jonin, who was back in the public eye after what most people assumed to be a years-long stint in the Umbu. He was less familiar with Itachi, though. Itachi. Sasuke's older brother, and the future Uchiha clan leader. He can be a bit more discreet than Shisui. She laughed. That isn't that hard, though. Naruto smiled, too. There was nobody in the village who didn't know exactly who Uchiha Shisui was. He had made sure of it. True. But between the two of them, you'd be hard-pressed to find who's the most talented. Itachi is not even 20 yet, but he's already reached S-rank classification in each of the 4 other nations' books. Both of them were younger than her, too. There was something scary about these young prodigies. S-rank. He whistled. These are kind of monsters, right? You could say that. We only have about a dozen in Konoha, and that's counting the Hokage. 3 of them are from the Uchiha clan, which makes it the strongest clan, in a sense. That's a lot. It probably showed on his face, as she smiled. I've heard from someone that you joined the reserve corps. She asked curiously. It was not common for somebody of his apparent skill. To Naruto, there was no question who the someone who talked about him was. How are you and Asuma doing, anyway? He turned the question back on her. She blushed. Never mind. Let me put you back to sleep, then. The town of Natami, close to the border of the Land of Rain, was a pretty bleak one. There was still some forest, but it was getting sparser and sparser. The weather was, well, rainy. It was hot and humid, and you always felt like thunder was just waiting to strike. Natami itself was rather small, compared to Konoha. The sun had risen already, for the little difference it made. It was still dark, and the sky was still gray. Not a bad place, huh? Toru asked him, wiggling his eyebrows, when he saw his reaction. Naruto snorted. Could be worse, I guess. It was a bit peculiar to see such an expressive face, combined with the Sharingan's glaring red. He was more used to seeing it on stern police officers, or the Fifth himself, who was pretty stoic. Toru. Please turn your Sharingan off. You're wasting your chakra. Kurane sighed. It's good practice, though. He shrugged, the single tomo in each of his eyes spinning lazily. That's what my brother says, at least. Well, Itachi says that it's also good not to depend on it all the time, too. Sasuke interjected. You're obviously jealous you don't have one yet, though. That's not true, Sasuke said hotly. Besides, I know I'll get it very soon. I hope. He muttered. Boys, that's not the time. Sakura sighed. Her teammates were great, but they could really bicker like kids, sometimes. Naruto stood there amused, with the two other genin, Mikami and Issei. Izumo and Kotetsu had left to scout ahead for Kurane. There had been rumors of military forces getting too close to the Land of Fire's borders, so Kurane's team, as infiltration and genjutsu specialists, had been sent to investigate. Being less combat-focused, she had asked for backup, just to make sure. She wouldn't say it out loud, but she also had a bad feeling. Something here wasn't right. Ninjas didn't survive in their line of work without developing a strong gut feeling when things were out of place, but it wasn't enough to just rely on it. Kurane had been fishing for information in the village, under two different transformations. Unfortunately, the villagers were pretty closed off, and she hadn't gotten anything she didn't know. This called for heavier methods. She observed several villagers, until she found one who fit her needs. She stalked her prey for most of the day, learning his mannerisms and habits. At the same time night fell, she sneaked in the house of a local fisherman, who lived alone. A minor genjutsu later, and the man would be sleeping for the next half-day. He'd wake up believing he had gotten too drunk, and would likely never realize. His name was Yamashita Iwami, and there really was nothing about him that stood out of the ordinary. He left for work in the mornings, took a nap at around 3 when he came back, and went out to drink at night. Sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. If there had been a Yamanaka on the team, she might have been able to glean more information, but this would do. She locked his house from the inside, and left through the window. The night was dark. There was nothing much to do in this kind of smaller village on the outskirts of the country, so people drank. Inside the Blue Ridge, 10 men were doing just that. They drank silently, with this strange pace that was somewhere between resignation and determination. They made sure to avoid any serious topics, and bad news. The innkeeper was telling whoever wanted to listen some half-finished stories, and a few men at the counter pretended to care while they downed their rice alcohol. Iwashi was one of them tonight, and he was not saying much. Bad news. He had grumbled, not wanting to elaborate. They had shrugged, not wanting to push him, and not particularly interested either. Under the disguise, Kurane was paying attention. The first 2 hours had proven unfruitful, so maybe she would need to be less subtle in her prodding. She cycled her chakra carefully, making sure to keep her alcohol levels low enough to not be problematic, but high enough that she wouldn't look too sober, either. Luckily, she didn't have to wait much. Hideaki spoke, darkly. I would give anything to get these IWA bastards out of here. Who wouldn't? Old Itsuka snorted. He took a long sip. From their tone, this is common knowledge here. It was the first time she heard of IWA presence in this area. Natami, despite being culturally closer to the Land of Rain, was still part of the Land of Fire. If IWA was moving troops around here, and they didn't report it to the daimyo, then it meant they were compromised. She spoke, thinking about the person she was impersonating's likely answer. They've been here for too long. There are folks out there that would have gotten us rid of them for some coin. She drank. One of the men laughed. Sure, but why would you want to bring these Akatsuki bastards in the mix? Whenever they get involved, shit turns south fast. They wiped a whole village, last time. Akatsuki? Who are they talking about? They moved on to other topics, and didn't want to tell more tonight. She left when they did, with more questions than answers. Sure, lighting is cool and all, but using fire release is still much cooler, I have to say. Toru insisted. Yeah, sure must be nice. All these possibilities, like fireballs and bigger fireballs. Naruto mimed reading a cue card. It's much more than this. Have you never been to the Uchiha festivals? Sasuke folded his arms over his chest. Why would I? My own clan's events are boring enough as is. He quipped back. That's only the Sarutobi. Sasuke pouted. What do you guys even do? It's the same fire stuff as us, but less fun. Not only. According to Shimura Tetsuo, We also fuck monkeys. Naruto shrugged, but his expression betrayed his amusement. Toru spat his tea, laughing, and Sasuke made a strangled noise. You're lucky Sakura is not here to hear this. Toru said. Why? She definitely heard Tetsuo say it before. Kurane appeared in a soft jump on the floor. Her serious face had them standing at attention right away. They gathered the rest of the team, and they waited until the 9 of them were assembled. Kurane told the rest of the group what she had learned. According to the local people, there's a strong IWA presence in this area. Izumo and Katetsu's ears both perked up. They were old enough to remember the last war, too. IWA gathering forces anywhere near their country was always bad news. She continued. That's why we need to verify the information before doing anything. A detachment as big as they've mentioned can't hide very efficiently. They need a place to eat, sleep. Considering this is the only village around, somebody must be coming here to buy food for the troops. So are we looking for caves? Sakura asked. Izumo spoke. When it comes to IWAnin, things are complicated. They are masters of earth release, and crafting an underground shelter is like second nature to them. They can move around pretty easily too, but the one thing they can't keep around in a seal for long is food. If as many soldiers are in this area as the people said, then they are not relying on sealed supplies. Kurane finished. What do we do, then? Naruto asked. I was told you were good with the Kage Bunshin. How is your transformation? Kurane asked with a sharp smile. The next day, 10 clones transformed into small birds were posted in different spots in and out the city. It was the only henge he felt truly comfortable with, so maybe the time spent bird watching had been worth it. Sure, he could transform into a bird at will, but he had never thought of transforming his clones for spying purposes. This opened a world of possibilities, and he knew he'd get Kurane a nice gift whenever she and Asuma got married. Sakura had layered a somewhat complex genjutsu on his clones, to make them less noticeable. People won't want to pay attention to them, she had said. She really was making strides, just like Kurane had said. In the parts of the village he couldn't cover, every member of the team was gathering information the way they could. So mostly asking innocent questions under transformation techniques. Toru was observing the people with his Sharingan, hidden away under dark glasses. So they waited. After 2 days, at sunset, they got what they were looking for. What the hell? Naruto hadn't realized one of his clones had been dispelled until he noticed he wasn't supposed to remember seeing 2 IWA Jonin laying dead 2 kilometers from their position. They're gone, he said. Who's gone? Kurane asked. There were IWAnin here, but they're dead. 2 of them are, at least. She almost jumped. This was bad news. What happened? I have no idea. They're about 2 kilometers, down this direction. He pointed. Let's gather the others and go. Quickly. Something strange is happening here. It was a gamble, she figured. But she knew IWA would not risk a war by killing 9 Konoha ninjas. The last war had been worse for them than it had been for Konoha, after all, and they were still recovering their strength. They reached the clearing in a few minutes. Izumo and Katetsu set up a defensive barrier around the area that would warn them of any arrival. The IWA ninjas were very much dead. And from their temperature, had been killed early in the day, even. A wind jutsu did this. She said out loud. This is pretty rare in this part of the country. She checked their equipment. Nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary here. Their jackets were torn up anyway, so she dug in, and fished out a bloody IWA bingo book. Well, that's not a bingo book. She amended, with a dark expression. This is a black book. Izumo stiffened and Katetsu shot him a knowing look. What does it mean? Sakura asked, not liking their expressions. Sasuke spoke, quietly. This means bad news. IWA is not amassing forces here, at all. Kurane added. One of the dead guys is Azuma Katsubaki, an A-rank Jonin. His partner, I don't know, but I assume him to have been around the same level. Sakura was shivering a bit. And that means there are more of them, aren't there? Toru nodded, his face somber, and his sherry non-active. There are many footsteps around here. I'd estimate there were from 6 to 8 people in this area. Most of them went in one direction, and one of them split off. 2 are dead, what about the rest? They're hunting someone. Kurenai finished. But they seem to have fled from the fight. If there was something that could send the IWA hunting corps running. Kurenai gave up on the mission right away. Their objective had been completed anyway. Troops had been amassed near Natami. The surprising part was that it turned out to be a smaller squad. 10 Jonin, and especially when they specialized in hunting, were more than enough to eliminate any opponent who wasn't a cage. She shuddered. Their one and only priority was surviving now. Team 6 and the temporary Chunin squad were running on lack of sleep, but in some circumstances, this didn't matter. These were some of them. She had split soldier pills and urged them to leave now. At full speed. She had weaved several distracting illusions during their escape, and asked Naruto to leave a few clones behind to set up some basic traps. Kotetsu and Izumo kept up a small detection field around them, while running. None of them had been triggered, so there was a good sign. This meant that in a few hours, they likely would be out of the hole. She had never missed the village in Asuma's casual manner more than now. When she got home, they would stop hiding. She would. Something brushed against her arm, and there was the sound of thunder striking the ground, right in the middle of them. They had made one mistake. Or rather, they had miscalculated. The kind of barriers and traps they had would have worked, too. If they hadn't been dealing with somebody who could simply notice and avoid all of the traps, and then appear in their midst faster than they could react. When Kurenai opened her eyes, just a few seconds later, Izumo was a charred corpse, and there was nothing left of Kotetsu. A man with long red hair was standing in front of her genin, an amused expression on his face. His chakra was heavy and powerful, and she knew she had no chance of getting out of here alive. Chapter 7, Her Last Stand. There are 2 ways for a ninja to make their presence known. The more traditional approach, of course, would be to not reveal yourself before striking. The target would see nothing, and their lives cut short without warning. You could make a grandiose approach as well, and not bother with hiding at all. There were many powerful, egoistical ninjas who favored this approach. Or you could do both of these at the same time. Truth be told, this was more akin to a cat playing with food. Looking at the red-haired man, Kurenai readied herself. Ase and Mikami were the most experienced of the genin here, and they were the first to react. A smoke screen was thrown on the floor, and Mikami leaped to the trees with a shell-shocked Sakura. Several kunao flew, courtesy of Mikami. He reached for the tanto he was carrying, swiftly. Suzuki and Toru flew through identical hand seals, letting loose 2 roaring fireballs. Naruto summoned 3 clones from within the smoke screen and had them transform in himself, Sakura and Mikami, and they pretended to flee the battle as well, in the opposite direction. He summoned as much lightning between his palms as he could safely, ready to try to shoot the enemy down. Kurenai cycled her chakra within her. She tensed, compartmentalizing several processes, and weaved 4 different illusions at the same time. This was her limit. The first technique would disturb the man's vision lightly, by making him perceive the genin's position as 2 meters closer to him than they actually were, giving them a chance to avoid his first counter-attack. The second layer was meant to be noticed and dispelled. It was an obvious trigger, which would chain into the third one when he did. The third genjutsu technique was a bind that activated with any chakra surge in the recipient. It was meant to be used in conjunction with another jutsu, and would lead the victim to believe they had broken out of number 2. In truth, they'd be paralyzed until they halted their flow completely. And if he did so, the 4th jutsu she had layered would make sure to take hold of his 5 senses. There was a moment of anticipation. Kurenai was no sensor, but even she had enough chakra sense to feel the man's spike. When the 3 ninjutsu techniques hit him, he slammed the earth with his foot and earthen walls rose to shield him. He then proceeded to kick his way out of it, hands up in mock surrender. He hasn't even bothered to remove my jutsu, she thought. This was bad. He definitely would have noticed at least the 3rd layer. If he was this confident in his ability to take on all of them even with it. She needed to cover for the kids. She moved through hand seals faster than she ever had in her life. He frowned, and before she could react, she felt something heavy slam into the back of her head. Kurenai hit the floor with a thud. A foot pressed on her back, with a terrible strength. "That's pretty naive of you," he said, evenly. "I expected better from Konoha, really. I can't believe the old fuck was afraid of you guys, if that's what you're like." She tried to weave hand signs with her left hand. A blade of wind chopped 3 of her fingers off. She screamed and thrashed. The man above her sighed. He waited 10 seconds. From the ground, she could see her precious genin, as well as the backup team rush into the ruined clearing. "Why haven't you run? Fools," she thought, but knew they wouldn't have managed to escape anyway. Her poor, sweet kids. "This is all my fault." Sasuke and Toru were both shaking, in anger as well as fear. Sakura put on her brave face, but her hand was white around her kunao. "The second any of you move, I kill her," the man said, lazily. Naruto deflated and let go of his chakra. Was this it? He wondered. Were they really going to die at 12 on a needless mission? "What do you want?" he asked with a voice more steady than he felt. "Nothing much, really. I got a few questions for you, though." There was a moment of silence. "What do you mean?" Mikami asked. "Not for you. I have no interest in you both, the girl or the Uchiha," he muttered. So he is talking about Naruto. Kurenai thought, teeth clenched. He nodded towards Naruto. "Kid, where are you from?" "Me? From Konoha. Sarutobi clan," he managed. "There's something weird about your chakra." "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Could have been me." He shrugged. Kurenai understood. "A censor. He's a censor." Of course her genjutsu hadn't taken, he had noticed right away, and didn't need his 5 senses to feel exactly where they were. Sarutobi, huh? He seemed to consider something. "Well, the face and the hair don't really match anyway," he muttered, and only Kurenai caught it. "Well, I'm pretty disappointed." He considered. "Who wants to live? Kill the rest, and I'll let you go." "Is this a game to you?" Kurenai growled under his boot. He kicked her face instead. "Sensei." She wasn't sure who had screamed. Issei chose that moment to attack. He had hidden his chakra as much as he could and aimed for the man's neck, staying low to the ground. "You fool." The redhead moved, and Issei dropped like a fly, his throat ripped open. Mikami heaved, but didn't try anything. The others froze. Then the man looked to his left, sighed and used a body flicker. He reappeared on top of a branch, holding Kurenai by her hair. 1 second later, the ground where he had been standing exploded. 3 dark green blurs flashed inside the clearing, their swords glinting in the moonlight. "IWA." The red-haired man released Kurenai, and she fell to the ground. He grinned, and moved under the blade that now flew over his head. The second IWA hunter, for this was what they were, leaped with a vertical slash. His sword broke on a stone that seemed to appear in its path. The last IWA nin caught him in a clay prison. "Dode Ryujin," he proclaimed. "For the crime of defection, murder as well as violating Article 33 of Iwa's criminal law, you are sentenced to death. To be carried immediately." The man laughed. "It's Uzumaki, now. Has Onaki not heard the news yet?" The next few moments were confusing. The IWA nin formed a tiger seal and detonated the clay. The redhead, who apparently went by Ryujin, hardened his skin. Kurenai ensnared all 3 IWA nin in an illusion that would make them more liable to let them go without trouble. The 2 other ninjas slammed 2 rock dragons into Ryujin. Naruto managed to catch Kurenai. Sakura anchored a genjutsu to the clearing, making it look as if she had set up several explosives traps. Sasuke managed to slow down Naruto and Kurenai's descent, and all 6 of the genin turned to flee. There was a grotesque sound as a fist made of hardened stone went right through one of the IWA nin's ribcage. One of them narrowly avoided getting sheared by the following wind blade. Ryujin smiled thinly and stepped down from the tree. He made a single hand seal. As he rocketed down, his chakra cycled. One layer of wind covered his body. Kurenai screamed. One layer of water covered the layer of wind. He touched down and he let his chakra fly. The entire clearing seemed to explode. Kurenai shielded her genin with her body. She felt blades of wind and water combined lacerate through her light armor. It hurt. Their vision returned. How touching, Ryujin said. But what are you hoping to do here? We have no hope. Kurenai knew. It didn't mean she wasn't going to try still. The man walked towards her slowly. She breathed heavily, blood dripping down her face. He shrugged. Well, I guess the effort is more important. Kurenai-sensei, go. Suzuki jumped, followed by Toru, whose Sharinan allowed him to be perfectly synchronized with him. A wire bound Ryujin's right arm and neck, and the flame Toru set along it flowed down its length. Naruto summoned 3 clones and they let lightning fly. Sakura weaved through hand seals, but never finished her technique. The man waved his hand almost lazily and a blade of air cut right through her left arm and eye. Naruto saw it in what felt like slow motion. One moment she was trying to shield herself, the next she was down on her knees, her left hand laying down in front of her, uselessly. Sakura! He screamed. Her right eye was wide with panic, and she looked as if she couldn't believe the stump that now was where her arm used to be was actually hers. Toru managed to avoid dying thanks to his Sharinan. He rushed to move Sakura away. Naruto came to her. His hands were shaking. What do I know about medical ninjutsu? What did I read? Useless. Useless. It was for nothing. Sakura was breathing fast, and Naruto knew she was likely to reach shock. Toru. Suzuki. Sakura. Kurenai's voice came out raspy. Her eyes were almost dull. Prevent excessive blood flow. Cauterize the wound. Naruto remembered. They'd need too much time. I'm sorry. She spared a look to a wide-eyed Sakura, especially. Could I have done more? She wondered. Kurenai-sensei. Asuma. Yui Kurenai stood proud, like these Konoha heroes you'd read about in history books. She weaved an illusion for the last time. In a fraction of a second, Suzuki understood what she was about to do. Oh no. Time seemed to slow, and he could see the chakra building up in her head. Wait, he could see it? Kurenai's forbidden technique, the hell-binding, linked Ryujin's chakra network to hers, for a short instant. At the cost of her mind. She felt a blinding pain inside her head. For the first time since he had appeared, the man seemed taken aback. They were both left chakraless for a second, and that's when the explosive tags she had set up on herself detonated. They stood in silence as Naruto tried to bind Sakura's stump as much as he could to prevent her from losing too much blood. Mikami's hand was glowing pale green, his mystical palm too unreliable to be of use. Sakura's voice was small. Sensei? Is she? Naruto closed his eyes painfully. What would he tell Asuma, if he couldn't even tell her student? Toru and Suzuki huddled together, their faces pale and lost. He would need one of them to cauterize the stump. Naruto's hands tightened as he looked over to where Kurenai had been. There was only a hole in the ground, still smoking. He looked away, his eyes burning. That's a devious little trap you had here, little leaf. I'm impressed. Ryujin, covered in heavy burns, crawled from the ground, meters away from where Kurenai had detonated herself. His voice carried easily over the distance. He had a vicious smile on his face. His left arm was in bad shape, dangling motionless from his shoulder. He twisted it experimentally, winced and decided to leave it alone. Toru's eyes noticed a strange-looking seal on his shoulder, gleaming with chakra. It's this. This is how he survived and since he cut off this train of thought. He was horrified, angry, terrified at the same time. He held Suzuki back, there was no way they'd be able to do anything. Your eyes, he blinked. Suzuki's eyes were red with the Sharinan, and staring at the seal on the Uzumaki's shoulder. He didn't seem to notice him. His eyes were wide, and he didn't seem to know whether to listen to his fight or flight instinct. This sure came in handy, huh? Ryujin muttered when he noticed what the Uchiha were looking at. I call it ground eater seal. Helps navigate underground even when I'm low on chakra. Surprised a few leafs with it in the past. Step. Time we finish it, now, boys. After fighting off almost nearly 10 jonin, and getting a nasty little surprise by the last one, he just wanted to move on with this. He sighed and felt his chakra come back to him slowly. Better not be wasteful now. He formed tiger, dog, snake. Wind style, drilling air bullet. Both Uchiha saw the attack coming but couldn't do anything but watch in perfect clarity as a compact bullet of air went through Mikami's head. He fell next to Sakura and Naruto, stiff. Stop it! Naruto heard himself say, his right hand still laying on a half-conscious Sakura. Step. Stop. He unconsciously grasped for his chakra. Step. Stop it. Sakura's chakra was reacting to his own. Step. I said, stop it. He felt the weight of something in his hand, and he pulled. In a flash of lightning, a spectral gauntlet appeared around Sakura's hand, settling around her forearm. A chain appeared in between Naruto and Sakura, linking them. Both faded out, flowing back into her. I need a weapon. He was carried by instinct only, now. Chakra built up in his hands, flashed like thunder, and where there was nothing stood a dagger. The man stopped in his tracks. I knew it! Ryujin exclaimed, a terrifying grin stretched too wide on his face. Somehow, this was the scariest thing Naruto had seen until now. If he was about to die, he would at least die fighting, like Kurane did. He nodded at Sasuke and Toru, and felt their identical resolve. Kinship here, out of all places. The red-haired man threw his head back and laughed. He wiped a tear from his eye. You boys can stop right here, I got more than bargained. The boss is going to be real happy about this. Now then. Make sure to stay alive until next time, all right? He asked. He started walking away. Where do you think you're going? Sasuke screamed, adrenaline rushing through his body. Toru pulled a short blade out as well. Naruto focused lightning in his legs, ready to try to blindside him. He turned back to look at them. I said. You boys can stop. They read murder in his eyes, his power pinning them down. What had they been thinking? The wave of killing intent abated. The murderer of Kurane-sensei whistled a jaunty tune as he left by walking. The tension stayed. They still had to close Sakura's wound. Sasuke and Toru did just that, searing the wound with fire, without a word. Theirs was the kind of single-minded focus that came when you were desperately avoiding thinking about a specific thing. She screamed herself hoarse, in a half-conscious daze, before passing out. The boys all huddled around her, not saying a word, their eyes wild. They broke down in nervous tears while the sun rose. Chapter 8, Life After Death. They made their way home in silence that was almost constant. None of them minded, being too shell-shocked to want anything else. Sakura didn't dare looking at Sasuke nor Toru with her only working eye. Anytime she did, she would remember the feverish terror she had felt looking at their red eyes while they burned her stomach close, and the smell of burned meat, all the while Naruto held her. She knew they had done what was needed, of course, but she didn't think this was about rationality. Somehow, they understood as much and didn't push. Her boys had always been respectful. Unbeknownst to them, similar thoughts were running through all of their minds. Had they been stronger, could this have been avoided? Was his refusal to learn killing techniques the reason why Kurane had died? Would his older brother have done better? How would he have saved everyone? What would happen now? The mission report was long and difficult. Naruto took it upon himself to do most of it, as he had been less close to Kurane. And when we arrived at the village, we came straight to you to report, Hokage-sama. He finished. I see. The fifth side. Thank you, Sarutobi-kun. He looked at them, sorrow in his expression. It is always said to hear of the passing of any Konoha defender. Yui Kurane will be remembered as a hero, who sacrificed her life to give you a chance. He stood up. For what it's worth, I'm truly sorry for your loss and what you had to endure. I had hoped that you would have had the chance to grow up in a time without war and such hardships. Sarutobi-kun, Harano-kun. Could you please leave us alone for the time being? Pass by the hospital, we shall speak later. He dismissed them, and they bowed before taking their leave. Fugaku put his hands on Sasuke and Toru's shoulders. He spoke quietly. I'm glad you're here. Tears were frowned upon in public in the Uchiha clan. He said nothing as they both shook, though, staying with them silently. Kurene's funeral was a sad affair. Naruto stood with Ino and Kano Amaru. Sakura was next to them, along with Sasuke and Toru, both in black slacks. Many shinobi attended, as well as some of her rare civilian friends. Shinobi usually made friends among other ninjas, who understood what their profession entailed exactly. Naruto noticed Asuma, his face devoid of expression. He had misbuttoned. His beard was sticking out, uncombed and tangled, as was his hair. He had talked to him earlier, assuring him none of them should feel responsible for what had happened, and this was the reality of their line of work. He had tried to light a cigarette but was trembling too much, and had given up before leaving. The picture that was displayed was an enlargement of one Mato guy had insisted Asuma and her take on a sunny day. She was smiling softly at the camera. She looked happy, Naruto thought. The third and his wife were standing next to Asuma, his eyes closed in sorrow for his son. They would talk in private later, leaving their son to grieve in peace. Asuma's brother was notably missing, along with his own wife, away on a mission. The fifth held a speech in her honor. As people were leaving, Naruto noticed a man that looked very much like Toru, talking to a tall figure. He was pretty noticeable. A face mask covered half his face, and his left eye was shut entirely, bisected by a faded scar. He had a stern-looking face, and the only eye that was exposed sized him up so fast Naruto thought he had imagined it. Kano Amaru went home with Biwako. Sasuke and Toru both disappeared somewhere after the funeral, so Naruto went to eat with Sakura and Ino. Sakura had some news to share, which she did, trying to keep a strong face, but she was struggling to eat with only one hand. Ino took mercy on her. I won't be able to be a ninja anymore, Sakura said, not meeting their eyes. What do you mean? Naruto asked. If she had decided that this was not the line of work for her, he would understand and support the decision completely. I spoke with Hokage-sama. He was kind about it, but, she trembled some. Ino rubbed her back lightly. He told me that putting injured genin back on the field was too much of a liability. Especially with the extent of my injuries. She sniffled, pointing at her single eye and arm. But you were going to be a strong kunoichi, Kurene said so went unsaid. What are you planning to do? Civilian school starts in a few months. Maybe. She tried not to look too pessimistic about it. I guess I could do that, I've always been good at studying. She shrugged, trying to look casual about it, but failed. I've been discharged from the Corps anyway. Hokage-sama said I'd get a pension, so now I just have to figure out what I want from my life, I guess. Ino was quiet, for once. Besides, Sakura continued. Most people don't really get to retire from being a ninja. Guess I got lucky, haha. She really didn't look as if she were laughing, Naruto thought. 12 and already a cripple, huh? She said after a pause. Look at me, no wonder my parents are mad. Don't say things like this. Ino said, firmly. But that's the truth. Sakura's voice got louder. That's why. That's what I am, now. She started sobbing. Naruto hugged her and she stiffened. Ino joined too and they held her as she broke down. You've been injured, but you're more than just this. He said, simply. Yeah, plus we all know you're going to adapt in no time. Haruno Sakura-chan won't be stopped by just something like a missing arm or eye. Ino harumphed. This is so stupid. Sakura cried, laughed but relaxed in her best friend's embrace. Thanks for this. Sorry for ruining your shirt, Ino. Sakura said, embarrassed. This old thing? Don't worry about it. It's the kind of thing that belongs more in your wardrobe anyways, big head. She winked. Pig. Sakura shot back. Billboard. They walked Sakura back to her parents. I don't really want to go back home, she said. You can always come to mine. Ino proposed. Or mine, if you enjoy having no electricity or running water, I guess. Naruto added. She laughed. No thanks. Appreciate the offer, though. I don't think my parents would approve of me staying with a guy, anyways, even if it's you. I think I'll face them. Fine by me. He shrugged. By the way, she said, not looking at them. Yes. I don't think I'm ready to give up on some aspects of being a ninja, yet. She made it a point not to look at their faces. Do you guys mind sharing a few of the things you're going to learn? Just because I'm going to be a civilian doesn't mean I. Naruto understood. Once he had experienced the freedom chakra offered, he had trouble seeing how he would be ready to give it up. Sure thing, Sakura-san, I'll bring you a ton of reading material, then. He shot her a thumbs up, then realized she wasn't even looking. And I might teach you a few tricks. From time to time. Well, if you're nice anyways. Ino joked. Thanks, guys. She finished, voice wobbly. I didn't want to ask Sakura too many questions, Naruto. But this mission, it was bad, wasn't it? Ino queried. Naruto nodded. Yes. He saw Ino's face, and knew that while she was curious, she wasn't pushed for more. Somehow, this is what made him talk. I've never been this terrified in my whole life. He said lightly, but feeling a bit tense. A single man slaughtered 10 jonin. In a blink, 2 chunin were. We never had a chance. He was talking faster. Kurane-san was strong. Stronger than I think I will ever be. And she could do nothing to him. What kind of monster is that? And we were just here, unable to even make him react. Asai. Mikami. Both dead. Sasuke and Toru were the best of us. They could do nothing. I could do nothing. Sakura got injured. What am I even dash? Ino grabbed his hand. I'm sure Biwako-sama talked to you already. It was not your fault. He stayed silent. Reverse the roles. Would you think any differently if I was in your shoes? What do you mean? If Asuma-sensei, she paused. If Asuma-sensei had died on a mission, would you think I was responsible? Of course not. He said vehemently. What could a genin even dash? She just stared at him, smirking. Oh. Yeah, I think I get it. He sighed. I just wish I could have been stronger. Or faster. Maybe if I had a jutsu. Anything. Fuck. I don't know. Dad says you can't save everyone. She shrugged. I think I get what he says, but it's probably very different when it happens. Yamanaka all studied psychology, of course. And they understood the difference between knowing something on a theoretical basis and experiencing it. You're right. He grabbed her head and she jumped. She didn't look at his face. Thank you, Ino-chan. Since when is it Ino-chan? Today, I think. Pfft. They reached Ino's clan compound. I'll extend the same invitation I did to Sakura-san. If you ever want to sleep at home, I have some very comfortable sleeping mattresses. And a tent, too, actually. He offered graciously, with an exaggerated flourish. She laughed. I'd love to, but Daddy would kill you. Fair enough. Naruto resumed his previous routine after spending the first 2 days moping. It seemed pretty pointless, and he felt that he was stagnating. But he did need the money, having spent nearly all of it on his tiny house. While his clones were doing the busy work and putting the bread on the table, he studied a way to find a solution to his latest problem. Despite the circumstances, he had taken notice of what the Uzumaki had called his ground-eater seal. He himself had no affinity for earth, so using it the same way was likely not an option. But he was trying to work something along the same lines. Well, he amended. It's not really the same at all. One weird peculiarity about the houses in Konoha was that they lacked foundations. There was no need for them, since it was easier to just build a rough outline of stone, wood, or metal, depending, and then anchor it to the ground itself. It would be just as stable. And when it came to building them, much quicker too. The first Hokage had built many of the clan compounds half a century in just a few weeks, by himself. They were still used to this day. A good Earth release user could do something similar with stone. A single day was enough to raise a house. Civilians did it slower, but tended to make use of shinobi to keep it all stable as well. This was the main reason land was the more expensive part, compared to the house itself. Naruto had a tiny house, sure, but the land itself wasn't much bigger. Grass grew around it, but there was no garden. What he did have, if only technically, was verticality. He could build up, sure. But he knew people would likely be on his ass soon. Most buildings in Konoha didn't go too high up, besides the tower. Could be accidental, could be on purpose. He wasn't trying to find out, anyway. Now, he wasn't exactly a seal master, yet. The best thing he could manage when trying to reproduce the ground eater was something that dug a slow hole in the dirt as long as he had the chakra for it. He was crafty enough, so he'd manage. Plus, the house was getting really cramped with 5 clones in it at all times. He needed some privacy, even from himself. He snorted at the thought. Weird problem to have. He beckoned one of his clones to come closer. Me? He asked dumbly. I don't care which one, just help me remove some of the dirt. He grumbled, a bit on edge after having spent most of the last days indoors. He held the homemade ground eater seal against the floor. He pictured a circular manhole. The seal activated with a steady drain on his chakra. The ground was lifted through the seal, until there was a 30-centimeter deep hole in his house. He'd have to hide this. Luckily, he had already gotten electricity set up. The clone passed the dirt to another, who threw it outside. Naruto threw him a dirty look, to which he shrugged. After a bit of deliberation, they figured they would do it the assembly line way. The original would dig, the clones would carry the dirt around, and 2 of them would dispose of it in a landfill. They decided on digging a rectangular room under the house. 2 clones were sent to the public library to figure out how to keep the underground room livable. They got to work. After 3 days, they had something decent going on. Naruto hadn't bothered sending clones to the mission office, electing to work on this first. Stone was dirt cheap, and some could be gotten for free, too. They had made a wall of it and cemented it. The jutsu to hold everything in place were quickly learned and applied. He felt pretty proud of himself, to be honest. Except, boss, we don't really want to spend the whole day in a dungeon. You're me, technically, so I know this already. He grumbled. The air smelled well, like being underground. It was a bit dark, too. He sighed. They'd need to find a solution for this too. It seemed like whenever he solved a problem, 2 more arose. Some fiddling with the seals that were used with surveillance cameras gave him a workable idea. Applying it to the ceiling of his house as well as the roof of the underground level made it look brighter, like a moving painting of the sky. It definitely didn't look real, but the clones complained a lot less, so there was that. Sticking and hiding a long air duct pipe through his whole house was a bit more difficult. This allowed him to recirculate the air, and mostly prevented the cave smell. Well, it still smelled of sweat after a while, but since the clones spent the full day there, they didn't really notice. Probably. Since nobody had given him shit about his clone trick, he was kind of surprised when the tall man from the funeral knocked on his door. Heitake Kakashi, the copy ninja, was a lean figure. His posture was mostly relaxed, but he somehow commanded attention all the same. His lone dark gray eye was fixed on him, in a falsely casual manner. He cut through the chase. You're wasting your talents. The man said, simply. I beg your pardon. You've got potential, why not put it to good use? He asked. Is this about the D ranks? Yes. I do need the money, though. He countered. Become a full-fledged genin and you'll have access to better opportunities. Even more so when you get promoted, and I know you will. Naruto sighed. Thanks, but I want no part of the killing. He bowed politely. Thanks for the show of faith in my skills, but I'm afraid I will have to refuse. He was about to close the door. The man spoke, his voice clear. You have nightmares at night. You wonder if maybe, if you had been faster. If you had been stronger. If you had picked a different mission. Then maybe things would have been different. Naruto paused, his face pale. The man continued. So you train alone, because you feel that this is on you. If there's a next time, you will do everything in your power to help. And maybe taking on missions solo will prevent anyone else from dying. How do you know this? Take a guess. You too. Naruto breathed. I don't want to waste time talking too much about the past, but I lost my team. And several of my teammates, colleagues, and friends. He stared at him. I know I will lose more. That's why I'm trying to be as strong as I can be. If I can protect just one more person, well, that's a start. Why are you here? Naruto asked, hesitant. A former colleague asked me for a favor. Training his little brother and his cousin. Toru's brother, Shisui, then. He had seen them talk at the funeral. What does it have to do with me? Well, they're down a member, as you know. Kakashi said flatly. Naruto's lips were set in a flat line. Yes. I think you could be a nice addition to the team. I'll get all three of you up to speed. If you don't want to kill, that's on you. He shrugged. Just make sure your decision doesn't hurt anyone on our side. I'll teach you lightning manipulation. Without wanting to brag, I'm probably better at it than anyone in the village. He thought for a second. Including the third, with all due respect. I'll need to think about it. Kakashi shrugged again, as if to say suit yourself. But then again, people tend to die around me, so I won't force your hand. He said casually, as if this were just a fact of life. Then, he left. Naruto thought about it, forgetting to sleep. The next day, he requested a formal test. He blazed through the genin exam. 3 days later, he was officially part of the new Team 6. Chapter 9, Hey Take Kakashi's Cruel Tutelage. Then there's Advanced Chakra Theory and Applications. Oh, right, you can also read the new 5-point elemental model, maybe in this order. Naruto slammed the stack of tomes on Sakura's desk. She felt a pang of fear. When had he found the time to read all of these? They were thick enough to double as bricks, and the contents were pretty dry, too. She might have underestimated Naruto's motivation levels. Still, she was very thankful. Well, this should keep me occupied for a while. She laughed, a pained sound. Yeah, it took me 2 weeks to read these 10. Plus the old ma. Sarutobi-sama had me running chores. He's such a slave driver sometimes, you wouldn't know looking at him, ha. Sakura's mother was glaring daggers at both of them, likely because despite being shinobi themselves, maybe because of it they had never approved of Sakura's choice to become a ninja. Her daughter's resolve to keep learning about the shinobi arts was probably rubbing salt in the wound. Well, Naruto didn't care much for her opinion. She was Sakura's mother, sure. But she wasn't Sakura. So Ram becomes this. Door looks like this. Sakura muttered, twisting her fingers in the corresponding positions. She knew that there were ninjas who used specific techniques with only one-handed seals. What was preventing her from learning how to do so? She knew she had decent, no, excellent control. It was time to put her money where her mouth was. So you're our third member? Sasuke asked, somewhat pleased. Seems like it. Your sensei convinced me, let's say. Naruto answered, shrugging. He had no intention to elaborate. Welcome aboard. Toru nodded, a small smile on his face. Did the man tell you anything? Nah, just to meet you guys at the training grounds, and to work on some basic combinations with you. Sure. Sasuke shrugged. Tell us more about your fighting style, we saw a bit, last time. Ah, there it was. The elephant in the room. An awkward silence stretched. I use Cage Bunshin, Transformation, and Lightning Release, mostly. I'm pretty fast, too. Oh, I've learned to use a few weapons. Blame the old man. Such as? Let me remember. I'm good with a few swords, but don't really like to use them. Katanas, glaives, halberds, bows. Axes, kunao, daggers, naginata. I prefer the staff, though. Okay. That's quite a lot, actually. Suzuki mumbled. Toru whistled. Really? I don't know. Sarutobi-sama said he had mastered twice as many by the time he was 9, so I feel I'm kinda late. Suzuki and Toru shared a look. Are there even this many weapons / is this likely? Was the question they communicated to the other. They shrugged. I think we can work with that. Toru said. Here's what I think could work. By the way, what about your dagger trick from last time? Suzuki asked. What dagger trick? Toru mimed. It was a pretty bad imitation, when it came to clarifying. The thing where you make sparks and summon a dagger out of nowhere. What are you guys even talking about? Last time. What you did against that Uzumaki guy. Huh. Now that they mentioned, he did remember something along these lines. There was just one little problem. I have no idea how I did. Really? Suzuki nodded slowly, not looking like he believed him at all. All right then. Keep your secrets. Guys, I'm serious. As they practiced their first clumsy combinations, the air seemed to change. Not by anything like the power of friendship, or anything like it, mind you. The boys' hair was standing on end, and felt tingly. They stopped their practice, sweat running down their foreheads. Suzuki tasted metal. Naruto smelled ozone in the air. Toru heard crackling and wondered if he was about to get electrocuted. 1 in 500,000, he reminded himself. There was a flash of blue light and something hit the floor in front of them. Heitake Kakashi stood up from the crater he had created. He was wreathed in lightning, sparks dancing around him in an unpredictable pattern. A tanto was strapped to his back. The Heitake clan sigil shone proudly on his shoulder. All in all, he looked like a warlord of old. Or an angry god, maybe, Toru felt. I see you guys are ready, so let's start with some light training to see where you are at. He thought a bit more, and deactivated the lightning cloak. There'd be time to turn it back on, if they were actually good. First step. Let's see your reflexes. He unsealed a dull wooden blade. Then disappeared. This had been the most brutal beatdown of Naruto's entire life. Hearing Toru moan in pain from somewhere around gave him the impression he wasn't alone. Kinship. Suzuki flew at a high speed and landed headfirst in the lake. The water must have been cold, then. Naruto thought, hearing him let out a high-pitched scream. Well. My first thought is. I'm very disappointed. Kakashi said, arms folded. What kind of jonin beats children up for fun? This is sick. Sick. Toru whined. Kakashi snorted. This was nothing but love taps. You guys are pretty weak for 12 years old. When I was your age, I was already a jonin. Wisely, Naruto refrained from saying anything about what good that did him. He still wanted to learn how to use lightning release, and this man was his best bet. Ma. I'll just have to remake you into something better, then. He shrugged. We're done here. Really? Toru perked up. Yup. I smiled, and it was a cruel sight. Time to move on the speed drills. You guys ever did hill sprints? They're great fun. By Wako-sama. Can you teach me medical ninjutsu? Please. Of course. What do you know already? Nice work on the weighted pull UPS, Suzuki. Let's add some more weight, alright. Kakashi encouraged. By Wako-sama. What's the nature of a man? Why do we live, just to suffer? She rolled her eyes. Don't be dramatic. Heitake is a strong jonin, I'm sure he has his reasons. Your core is overtrained in comparison to your back, Toru. Ever heard of erector spiny, or does it not look as impressive to girls in the summer? I really hate you, sensei. I see you're gaining a bit of muscle, Naruto. Kakashi must be going hard on you. Mind you, I had much lower body fat, while having more muscle mass, at your age. You can ask Biwako about it, this is likely why she couldn't resist me. Alright, I'm going solo on a mission for the week. Don't worry, I found you a trainer. He's got some genin around your age, too. Suzuki blessed the heavens. Toru hooped. Naruto knew Guy and Kakashi were somehow friends, so he just cringed. "Where did you get such nice legs?" Ino asked. She wasn't jealous of Naruto, of course. But she would train her own harder. Just for fun. "Don't ask. Did you miss me yet?" "Almost. This week with Guy had been hell." "Yes." Toru admitted. "Great. Let's do some strength training. I don't think you will ever get the control needed for the mystical palm." Naruto winced. Biwako-sama was always very blunt. It was a blessing and a curse. "So? What do I do?" "Well, we're going to have to find another way. The first was said to have been a great healer, and I'm sure he never learned what the mystical palm even was. Reflexes training. So by using my own strong chakra and harmonizing with somebody else's, I should be able to accelerate their healing." Naruto asked. "Yes." Biwako confirmed. Then thought some more. "Or maybe give them cancer. 2 against 1. Toru and Naruto on one side. "Sasuke, get ready." He groaned. Kurane was dead, and the world moved on, in the end. The sun still rose and fell every day, and the village was still standing. Families were still together, and friends still friends. It never got easier, but all of the living learned to live with it. Ninjas endure. Sakura laughed in delight. She had finally managed to make the switch to one-handed seals for the 3 Academy basic techniques. Thank you, thank you." She jumped on Naruto, hugging him with all her might. Ino, in her infinite generosity, pretended not to react. "Survival training, I'll see you guys in 3 days." Kakashi said cheerfully. 3 days in the forest of death. Toru shouted. "It's in the name. Death. Oh, can't believe I forgot to take your supplies." Kakashi slapped his forehead. "Wouldn't be much of a survival training if you had all of your fancy equipment." "Well, this is very rough, as far as medical jutsu go. Keep practicing." "But it might work." "It might." Biwako stressed. "Ma, your bodies are a bit stronger, now. Let's train your chakra reserves, now." "Damn it. Well, yeah. I kinda neglected this for years, myself. I don't want to scare you kids, but the reason is, this is going to suck." And I told Shikamaru that if he was going to be such an ass about it, then I'd tell his mother about it. Should have seen his face. Ino laughed. "Jokes aside, he's lucky to have both of you." Naruto smiled. "Damn right." She stuck her chin out proudly. Her best friend always had her back, as she had his. Deep meditation is to train your yin side. The boys ignored him, as they finally had a reason for it. "Also, if you suddenly feel yourself turning to stone partially, please feel free to stretch your legs. It's not worth it." "What? Do I really have to do this, Biwako-sama?" "Tailoring your clothes is very important. It's the difference between looking like a destitute son and a respectable young man. Hiruzen always made sure to look sharp." All right, all right. How long can you keep your eyes up, Hyuga?" Sasuke asked, his own eyes red. He was getting tired, but wouldn't show it. The Hyuga was, too, he could see it. "Longer than you, Uchiha," Neji replied, veins popping. He was tired, sure, but wouldn't show it. The Uchiha was getting worn out as well, his eyes could perceive it. Toru cheered Sasuke on. Naruto sighed. "I see you're hanging with girls, Naruto." Sarutobi-sama nodded wisely. "It is that time, indeed." "What are you even talking about?" Naruto asked. "When I was around your age, I remember quite a few dash," he interrupted himself. Biwako was looking at him, squinting her eyes. "Air. Let's move outside, Naruto. We just got in, though. Don't question me." "So the third never bothered teaching you the difference between internal and external release?" Kakashi asked, skeptical. "Nah, didn't even know it was a thing." Naruto shrugged. "Okay. Well, to put it simply, internal release involves using chakra inside the body, generally to enhance a specific body function, or as protection." "Got you." External is everything outside the close proximity of your body. Medium, long-distance jutsu and all. Okay. I'm kinda surprised Sarutobi-sama never taught you this. Every clan child knows this, usually. Especially when talking about elemental affinities. Sometimes, I get the feeling he prefers his students to figure their limits themselves. He saw Kakashi look curious. He would probably say something about, the more walls one perceives around them, the sturdier the prison they build, or some weird platitude. Yeah, that sounds like him. Kakashi admitted. The third could be a bit of a dick, sometimes. He probably took his weird sense of humor from his summons. Not that he was one to talk. Personally, I'm way better at using external techniques. What about your electric mantle technique? It's lightning cloak. Yeah, that one. You're trying to piss me off, aren't you? Kakashi asked. Naruto tried to look innocent. Kakashi continued. I copied it years ago with my eye. And even then, it took me a while to be able to use it. And it takes so much chakra that I just use it for smaller bursts of speed. Would it work for me? It wouldn't be the same. My eye allows me to see attacks before they come, and then I can turn my cloak for the minimal amount of time I need it for. Naruto squinted. So when you came here with it on, a month or so ago. This counted as a very important occasion. Well, this likely won't do anyone much good, but I guess it could help someone survive until an actual medic makes it to the field. Biwako huffed. I'll take it. Lightning crackled, dancing in Kakashi's hand. This was his masterpiece, his ultimate jutsu. His magnum opus. His Reikari, and with it, legend said he had cut through thunder itself. Sensei, there's something I don't get. Naruto asked. Tell me. His Reikari never failed to awe people. He held back a smug grin. How does this qualify as an assassination technique, again? It's an instant kill. But it's so loud and flashy. This is more of a combat technique. You'd be hard-pressed to find people who can avoid my full speed. But, if it requires you going full speed, you're also wide open to counterattacks. Yup. That's why I have this. He thumbed at his Sharingan eye. I don't have one. And if it requires going so fast, it's not practical either, there's plenty of jutsu that don't. Naruto reminded him. Wouldn't I just get myself killed, trying to use it? I mean, sure. There's a risk. Minato-sensei had helpfully pointed it out too, long ago, embarrassing him in front of Obito and Rin. Now his student was trying to do the same. Toru held back laughter. Sasuke pretended to practice his katas. Kakashi felt his cheeks burn, under the mask. Wouldn't anything else be more useful to me, then? Keep being a smart-ass and I won't teach it to you. He huffed. I don't even think I can use it without a Sharingan, and this is just used for murder, anyway. Naruto asked Toru about the girl with the pale eyes that Sasuke was sometimes talking with, when nobody was looking. Oh, Hinata. His grin turned conspiratorial. Find her cute. Nah, I don't mean it like this. Toru sighed. You're really no fun, sometimes. Isn't she the Hyuga heir or something? She had been in his class, but was usually pretty withdrawn. It had been a surprise to see her giggle openly when Sasuke gestured wildly, probably painting a wild tale of their latest torture session under Kakashi's tutelage. Yeah, she is. Toru actually looked serious, for once. Some of the higher UPS in the clan don't really like it when we hang with Hyuga. Why? I'm not sure, probably some old clan stuff, I was never too good at this. Plus the clan head is a bit mad that Fugaku-sama became Hokage, according to him. Pointless conflict between clans was a bit of a shame. Well, I'm not super close with the Hyuga anyway. Hinata's cool and her little sister Hanabi's got the right spirit, though. He laughed. But Niji's kind of a dick. So stuffy. That's not true. He only reacts this way around you because you keep on provoking him. But he does look girly. He whined. Nothing wrong about that, mind you. Naruto didn't deny it. He had thought Niji was a girl, at first. After some preliminary testing, Kakashi had reached his conclusion. You're much better suited for internal release, it seems. Is that good? For close combat, sure. Enhancing your body or weapons with elemental chakra should be decently easy for you. Long-distance ninjutsu might be a bit more difficult, though. I can work with that. Wanna learn Raikiri? Kakashi asked, trying to sound indifferent to the answer. No, thanks. The spark jacket jutsu thing seems nice, though. He sighed. Let's get you started on it, then. In a few years you should be able to make some use of it. The summer festival was nice. He spent the early hours with Sasuke and Toru, who had become good friends. They later left to join their families, and he went to meet Ino and Sakura. They looked adorable in their yukata. They watched the fireworks together, and all three of them wished life could always be as nice as this summer evening. Wanna try for the Chunin exams? Risk dying, do my best not to have to kill anyone, possibly fight friends, humiliate somebody or myself in front of the village in my clan. He was not too interested in a promotion, as they were taking a fair amount of C ranks with his team. The money was pretty good, even if he didn't have the time or energy to also run D ranks solo. He wasn't even sure if he was still allowed to, being part of a team. At the same time, he knew Ino was going, and she'd never let him forget she was a rank over him, and technically his superior. It was important to Sasuke and Toru both, who felt they had something to prove to the Hokage and/or their older brother. Without him, they'd have to go with somebody they had never worked with, and would face more risk. Naruto sighed. Sure, let's go. Chapter 10, Into the Forest. The exams were to be held in Konoha in October. That left them about 3 months to prepare. Kakashi seemed to think it was more than enough. Or at least, that's what Naruto thought he got from the man. It was kind of hard to read alone eye. And the man liked to fuck with their minds anyway. Okay, maybe I have no idea what he thinks. Training was going great, though. Sure, he had almost no free time, the sessions were painful, he was running low on chakra all the time since he had clones doing more theoretical work, and he was actually tired most of the time. Sure, there was all that. He didn't care, as long as Kakashi trained them all to their limit, which he was doing with surprising zeal. He hadn't known what to expect of the stern-looking man, but he turned out to be a somewhat quirky, generally casual sort. All in all, he liked him. Well, at the end of the day, at least. Not when he made them do mud runs in the early mornings. Not when he made them eat as much protein as they could fit in their daily lunches. Not when he had them stretch until Naruto felt they were ready to become contortionists. Not when he laughed while they failed at water walking. But yeah, the rest of the time. He was having them do so much practical work that it felt as though he was running them through Umbu boot camp. Or that's what Sasuke had said. He himself had no idea what Umbu meant, besides shady murders. Luckily, he had his clones doing most of the reading for him. He would get around mentioning them to Kakashi, but, not yet. He was kinda terrified of what sort of devilish routine he'd concoct if he knew about them. Speaking of. When Sakura had asked how he managed to read this much, he had explained his clone trick, without mentioning the basement full of them. It was the first time he saw such envy on her face, and he wasn't sure how he could help, since she didn't have the reserve to maintain even a single one for long. Sometimes he wondered if she felt lonely. Ino and him were likely the only ones she had regular contact with, and she had decided against going to civilian school, choosing to learn on her own. Sasuke and Toru, to a lesser extent, would likely spend more time with her, but Sakura had gotten used to the change in depth perception that came with only having one working eye somewhat easily, but the arm was more difficult to deal with. She still remembered the way her arm had cooked, and felt a bit strange around both Uchiha. Maybe therapy would help, but unlike the physical aspects, they didn't come for free for shinobi. To Naruto, there was something to be said about it. The village would keep a ninja in working shape, but nothing would be done to help them cope with the unique aspects of their profession, such as the widespread trauma and detachment that usually came with it. No wonder some of the shinobi were so screwed up. A more traitorous part of him wondered if this was done on purpose, even. There were some questions he didn't feel ready to ask Sarutobi-sama. Same thing went for his dreams. As for Sakura, well, Naruto would make sure to check on her. Especially now that Ino was busy preparing for the exams as well. He was glad that Asuma seemed to be doing well enough to resume his duties to his team, considering they were going to risk their lives soon. So yeah, that's how to use the lightning palm. I think you got it down. Thanks. Naruto said, actually feeling grateful. Having a few non-lethal jutsu helps a lot, sensei. I mean, it can be lethal, if you want. Kakashi shrugged. Just overcharge it. I'll keep it in mind. Naruto waved off. Next one is a very handy one when traveling, as you can use it to recharge electronics. Make sure to get the voltage right, though, you don't want to fry your things. Across the training grounds, two of Kakashi's clones were teaching Sasuke and Toru some fire release jutsu. Also, make sure to actually name your techniques, at least in your mind. It sounds goofy on paper, but it makes the difference, when it comes to your ability to visualize it. Do we have to scream their names? Toru asked. The theatricals were the best part of the whole thing. Only if you want to. They managed to cram a whole lot of last-minute training in these 3 months, in the end. Gaara of the desert looked up as the door to the theoretical first exam opened. Strange. There was nothing that really stood out about the mousy brown-haired Konoha shinobi. His teammates were Uchiha, for sure, and stood with easy confidence, scanning the room with sharp eyes. He himself was of medium height, and lightly muscled. Probably a close-range specialist, even though he couldn't see any weapon on him. Likely sealed, then. But there was something about him that screamed familiarity. Had Gaara been anyone else, this would have been a reason enough for him to engage in light conversation, and see why he felt that way. Gaara decided he'd introduce himself later. Then he'd crush him to death. Karen, no clan, felt him enter the room as well. The boy, who was apparently from the Sarutobi clan, according to the markings on his traditional even kinda outdated black ninja gear, had one of the strongest presences in the room. Well, the largest chakra source was the girl with lime green hair, by far, followed by the terrifying redhead carrying a gourd. Sarutobi came third, but at least his chakra didn't feel as oppressive and non-human as the others. She didn't like being here. She hated feeling so weak, compared to the many powerful signatures she could feel in the room. She hated being weak. In truth, she hated a lot of things about her life, in general. She had wanted to be a shinobi, to become powerful, and free. The higher UPS had just made her a tool for others, instead. She hated Kusa, she hated Konoha too. She dreamed of being alone, close to the sea. Karen had been forced to participate, in order to make sure her teammates survived. Her own fate didn't seem to matter much, other than this. Ino had winked at Naruto when she caught him staring at her team. He nodded, wishing her good luck silently once more. They had talked the night before, in any case. He didn't want her to be associated with him too much, in case the exam turned south. He smiled at Niji, who smiled back. He wasn't worried much about him, since the teams facing Guy's students were likely to be the ones to pity, instead. Hinata grabbed Sasuke's sleeve, whispering him good luck in a quiet tone, before leaving. Besides a redhead who stared at him with murder in his eyes, nothing was too out of place. You could get used to anything. The exam started without much fanfare, a quiet affair. There were some mental games being played, it seemed. So the exam was likely not about simply answering the questions. What were the required qualities for a Chunin again? Leadership? Nah, makes no sense here. Preparation? Yeah, that must be it. Always be prepared. Well, he had done the required reading beforehand, so the exam was pretty straightforward. He couldn't help but notice a ton of people cheating, but well, if they hadn't wanted to read the dry books, he couldn't blame them much. The ability to improvise was almost as important as preparation for a ninja. When he turned to look at Toru, he saw him staring at him somewhat sheepishly, "Sherry non-on." He mouthed. "What?" Toru mimed writing and waited. "Oh. Now he got it." He snorted. "Well, If his teammate needed to copy off his paper, who was he to deny him? The 10th question was another test meant to see who was too weak-willed to pass, likely. So he waited. Plus, no one in this room had the pull to force them to remain genin, even less so when it came to the people from outside Konoha. Well, maybe Kakashi or the old man could. And they'd be dickish enough to do it, too. The second exam was taking place in the Forest of Death. How nostalgic! Toru whispered. Sasuke tried to fight back a smile. Now it's time for you children to sign these waivers, in case you were to die. We don't want Konoha to be responsible, of course. A man with short-cropped green hair laughed. To pass, they only had to make sure to arrive at the tower in the middle of the forest with a scroll of heaven, and a scroll of earth. Easy enough. Plus they kinda knew the layout, by now. Toru. Sasuke. They turned to face him. We should be able to manage just fine, right? They nodded. Kakashi was a dick, but he knew what he was doing. If he felt they were ready, they likely had been for months. Or that's what they figured, at least. Well, I have a favor to ask. Shoot. Do tell. Can we make sure that everyone from the academy makes it out alive? I don't care about them passing, just that. Naruto asked. They looked at each other, then at him with identical smirks. Well, of course, we were planning on it anyway. Sasuke shrugged. Toru continued. But is there someone in particular you want to keep an eye on? For some reason, Naruto felt vaguely embarrassed, as well as annoyed. Of course not. It didn't seem to convince them. They went into the forest after around half the people had gone in. They were the last Konoha team to go in. Naruto nodded to his teammates, and summoned 3 clones, using around a fourth of his chakra. A hefty cost, but he'd manage. He weaved. Dragon, ox, tiger, snake. Lightning release, starlight. A ball of light, smaller than a fist appeared in his hand. The Sharingan could see in the dark, sure. But he couldn't. And this was more chakra efficient anyway. It also had the advantage of bringing greedy enemy teams straight to them. Part of him wondered if this wasn't being overconfident. His clones split, tailing the other Leaf teams. He would have sent one to after Niji's team too, but he could be very competitive and he knew the older boy would likely burst his clone the moment he saw it, no matter how good his intention had been. Hinata was likely to notice him anyway, so he would have to make sure to stay more than 100 meters away. He sent it after Team 4, the one team he wasn't very familiar with. They were still Konoha ninjas, so comrades, technically. Team 6 leaped into the trees. The exam was on the moment they had entered. Uchiha Shisui groaned as he let himself fall back. On the other side of the training ground, Uchiha Itachi sat down on a stump with a bit more grace. Are you worried? Shisui asked. Just a little tense. A tense Itachi looked pretty much like a regular Itachi to most people, mostly because he was a master of the poker face. Shisui knew him a bit better than that, though. Because of the exam. Not the exam itself. Itachi sighed. It's more about who they sent this year. Anybody interesting? Itachi threw him a side look. You could say that. Waterfall sent their Jinchuriki. Not much is known about her though. The Seven Tails, then. I hope Sasuke and Toru are careful, then. Suna became much weaker as a village when they lost possession of Nanabe, it was no secret. There's more. Ever heard of Gaara of the Desert? Shisui frowned. The Sand's unstable Jinchuriki? They actually sent him. Itachi nodded. God, I hate this creepy little fucker. Itachi blinked. You met him? I had the chance to, yes. When I was sent to Suna for 3 weeks, 2 years ago. I remember. Well, the Kaze Cage has about as much control over his son than the kid does over his Biju. Shisui snorted. Not much, then. None. Team 8 had learned a few things about tracking under Hyageko's leadership. Rule number 1, the tracker sets the pace. Kibis knows having the furthest range, he was the one currently leading. They had easily managed to steal an Earth scroll from one of the weaker Sand teams. Kiba stiffened and held up a hand, motioning Shino and Hinata to stop. I smell blood. And I think I heard something. Being an Inyazuka, all of his senses were sharp, even though his smell was by far the strongest. Where from? Hinata asked. Down, I think. To the east. She held up her hands in the ram seal. Byakugan. Her sight expanded. Even after years of using it, it felt strange. She couldn't tell which part was weirder, the near-perfect field of vision the Hyuga Dojutsu provided, or seeing the world in the restrictive way the way people did normally. She located the source of the noise Kiba had heard easily. Under the remains of a broken tree was a rain ninja. I see someone, Kiba, Shino. They're alone, and injured, too. I don't think it is a trap, she said. They consulted each other, before deciding to go. A teenager, 3 or so years older than them lay there, bleeding from a leg injury. It didn't look particularly dangerous, but he had already lost a lot of blood, according to the trail he had left. He noticed them quickly. What the hell? He grimaced and tried to reach for a weapon. No, no, no. Shino spoke. We're not here to fight you, we already have a scroll. Why should I trust you? You can't know that. Hinata said, acknowledging the truth. But I assure you, we just came to see if we could help. Don't come any closer. Come on man, we're not trying to trick you. Kiba held up both scrolls. See? Got what we need already. That's not the problem. What is? Shino asked. Hinata saw something else. Kiba, wait. Don't approach him. There's something weird about his leg. He halted, looking at her curiously. They had never been close in the academy, but ever since they had been put on the same team, he had learned that while she was not the very talkative type, she usually had something important to say when she did speak. She activated the Byakugan again. Oh no. What is it, Hinata? It's in me? Is it in me? The genin started getting more agitated. Please, no. Please. There's foreign chakra in his leg. It's spreading through his body at a slow rate. What is it doing to him? Shino asked. I don't know yet. We shouldn't get any closer, though. Hinata decided. Kiba sighed. Sorry, you've heard her. The teenager said nothing, but he was getting frantic. He was muttering something. What was that? A demon? Kiba asked, his curiosity now piqued. There's a demon in the forest. It killed my teammates. It really killed them. Both. There were angry tears in his eyes. Now it's going to kill me too. Oh no. Hinata said, feeling miserable for him. Look, I'm sorry, man. Kiba said. I think I see who you're talking about, though. The short, red-haired guy from Sand, right? We did well to avoid him then, guys. Shino's insects started buzzing heavily. Hinata's Byakugan noticed a heavy chakra approaching. No. It wasn't approaching. It had been close to them the whole time. It had been hidden from the Byakugan. Hidden from Kiba and Shino, as well. All three of them tensed. A gurla laugh echoed in the forest. The injured ninja shivered. What does Suna have to do with this? The rain genin was now shouting. I'm talking about this monster girl from Waterfall. Check the description for the links to the author.